Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 9th, 2014 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. Welcome. There are copies of our meeting agenda on either side of the room on the shelves there. If you haven't already done so, I would invite you to please pick up a copy and follow along with our proceedings tonight. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on our agenda for action tonight, as well as a segment under item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on our agenda tonight. And I'll remind you of that segment when we get there. It is our proud tradition to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this point, I would like to ask everyone present to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask our fine village clerk to call the rolls. Ms. Holden.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Rankin? Here. Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Newstead?
Here.
Commissioner Durkin?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. It brings us to item 3, which pertains to minutes of council meetings. We have one set of minutes to approve tonight. Those are our meeting minutes from December 2nd, 2014. Are there any changes, questions, comments, or corrections from any members of this council? Seeing that there are none, do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved. Second.
Everyone in favor, please say so.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No being opposed, those minutes are approved. Thank you. And just like that, we are at item 4, which is reserved for questions and comments of a general nature. If any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on our agenda tonight, we would welcome you to come up to the podium. Let us know who you are, and we welcome hearing from you. Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any items of a general nature? Very well. We'll move on to item 5, which pertains to council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share with the rest of the community items of interest or various goings on. So with that, I will start down to my right with Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. The downtown Downers Grove is once again doing its Giving Tuesdays. You can shop and dine while giving back this holiday season on each Tuesday this month. There are a lot of different shops downtown that have different benefits going to great organizations like DuPage Pads, the West Suburban Humane Society, Paws with a Cause, Family Shelter Services. And all you have to do is go downtown, make a purchase in one of the participating stores. Sales tax, as I'm sure Commissioner Durkin will remind us again, comes right here to Downers Grove, and you get to help a well-deserving organization while you're doing your Christmas shopping. So I hope that folks will keep that in mind and take advantage of it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rankin.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Go over to Commissioner Arnett.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson. No report. Commissioner Durkin.
Yes, Mayor, just want to piggyback on Commissioner Jose's comments. We have 2 remaining full weekends before the Christmas day is here. And as always, I know I sound like a broken record, but every sales tax dollar collected here in our community is a huge help to all of us. It's how we pay our bills, our salaries, our salt, you name it. That's how we pay bills. And we know there's a lot of competition on stores to shop at, but we're just as good, if not better, than our surrounding communities because we got the Bentley dealer and the Lamborghini all the way down to the Downers Grove historical ornament that Commissioner Jose spoke about. So please, if you can find it in yourself to find that perfect gift in our village limits, we would greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I understand that if you buy, for every Lamborghini you purchase, we'll throw in one of the historic ornaments. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things. Every time we have a good crowd with us, I like to remind folks that there's lots of ways for you to communicate with your village. On our website at downers.us on the right side, there's a whole area of network with us, from everything from social media to a really interesting and good community-wide notification system where you can register your contact information, and local leadership may contact you with important messages in the public interest. That's been a real success. Also, as the holiday season and Christmas season is upon us, we have been seeing some beautifully lit up homes with Christmas lights. For those of you like me who have some lights that didn't make it through last year, we are offering Christmas light recycling right now through January 30th over at the Public Works facility. This program meets our goal to be sustainable and mindful of our environment here in the village of Downers Grove. It's something we've done for the last number of years and is a really great service to our residents. So if you have any old Christmas lights right now after decorating or even after taking them down after the Christmas season, feel free to recycle them at the Public Works facility at 5101 Walnut Avenue. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And speaking of opportunities to interact with your village council, I don't think I've seen a 2-week spread or even a 10-day spread where there have been so many opportunities to interact with the village council. Let's start with last Tuesday's meeting on December 2nd. That was that opportunity. Then there was a town hall meeting on December 4th. That was here in Village Hall. And there was another town hall meeting on December 6th, which residents were able to participate in for the first time electronically while watching the meeting live from home and emailing in questions. This was a town hall meeting regarding our proposed facilities proposal. And here we are today at another Village Council meeting. And then on Thursday, December 11th, we are holding our 4th annual ComEd Town Hall meeting at 6:30 p.m., which will be held at the Public Works Building in Downers Grove, 5101 Walnut Avenue. This is part of the village's ongoing efforts to continue to try to work with ComEd to enhance the reliability of the electrical service in our community. And the good news is every year we make strides with ComEd to improve service, and so we continue to do this town hall meeting. So anyone who has any issues with respect to the reliability of their electrical service and would like to interact directly with senior representatives from ComEd, they will be there along with engineers, the people who actually know what goes up on the poles. And we found it to be very successful when residents in different neighborhoods are able to interact with ComEd representatives, talk turkey, if you will, and we've seen some real results come out of that. No, things aren't perfect. There's still improvements to be made, but it's certainly been heading in the right direction. So anyone who's interested, either residents or businesses, would like the opportunity to have a direct forum with ComEd representatives, please come out and join us this Thursday, December 11th at 6:30 at the Public Works facility at 5101 Walnut Avenue. And I think by that point in time, we're all going to feel as though we've been living under the same roof for 2 weeks because really, I think it's an unprecedented run of 5 meetings where talk about accessibility of your village council to the residents. And it's a lot of time that I think all of us put into it, and deservedly so, and we appreciate the residents who attend. So I want to thank my fellow colleagues for the time that they put in that over the last 10 days. That's all I have for my part, so we'll move on then to item 6, which is dedicated to public hearings. We have no public hearings tonight, so we will move right to item 7, which is the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda tonight. Do I have a motion to approve said consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Are there any questions or comments with respect to any of the items on the consent agenda from any members of the audience? Any questions or comments from members of the village council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the consent agenda passes unanimously. That takes us to our active agenda, which is a real doozy night. I always get like this at the end of the year, don't they? We have items 8A through Q on our active agenda tonight, so we'll begin with 8A. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 26?
I have a motion to amend the ordinance. Is this the appropriate time to say that?
Actually, let me ask a question. Is there a motion with respect to the village stormwater and floodplain ordinance?
Yes, there is.
And what would that motion be?
I would like to move to amend the ordinance to be changed from the way it's written, net new impervious of 500 feet, to be changed to net new impervious of 700 square feet.
Well, I think actually, Commissioner, you can just make that motion. In other words, you can make the motion just to change it to that, since there hasn't been a motion made or seconded for the alternative. I think we can take your motion as one to change the requirements to, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the number.
To 700 square feet of new impervious surface rather than 500 square feet of new impervious surface as it's explained in the ordinance.
So make sure okay, we'll go with that. Well, it's a motion to establish that as the trigger point.
Right.
750.
700.
700.
Motion is to establish the trigger point at 700
700.
additional square feet. Understood.
I'll second that motion.
So that's versus the 500, that's staff's recommendation, ordinance is written.
Yes.
Or not ordinance, but the...
And we can get into that.
Okay, all right.
There was a motion to second. What I was trying to establish is that no motion had been made to set it to 5.
No, I understand.
It's currently 2,500. There's now a motion on the table, which has been seconded, to make it 700.
Thank you for the clarification.
That's okay. I should have asked in the first place. So there's been a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to the motion that's on the table? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Barnett.
I'm glad we're moving this forward. I like the idea, even if it's 700, I would prefer 0 between myself and the colleagues sitting up here. But it's progress, and I hope that folks in the audience understand what very real progress it is. One of the things we hear about nonstop, have heard about as long as certainly I've been here, and probably Mayor, you heard about it much longer than most of us, is this situation where people live in a house for years, perhaps decades, and some neighbors build, and the first thing you know, they're underwater, and they're flooding in one way, shape, or form. They've got water in their basement or water in their garage. And that's been a sort of a strange chicken and an egg conversation as it relates to county and state rules relative to stormwater. And this is a positive step that your village is taking to try and end most of that. So the big situation that we all know, and I'm sure we have friends or neighbors or relatives who have had that, hopefully will happen a whole lot less. It is absolutely true that when you build and cover more footprint with more impervious area, you change your neighbor's environment, and that's what we're trying to put a halt to. So I'm thankful that everybody is continuing down this road, and I wish it was a little shorter and a little tighter leash, but I'm happy there's new rules in play, and I appreciate everybody staying with it for as long as we have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from the audience?
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Mayor, I'm a
Good
little
evening.
slow these days, but I did have a question.
Please.
You accepted at this point.
Of course.
I'm Gordon Goodman. I live at 5834 Middaw, and in principle, I agree with the position that Commissioner Barnett just mentioned, that it would be very good to have this a tighter rather than a looser requirement. And so I was going to ask what the reason for not adopting the staff recommendation was. And I would think that the staff recommendation has been well supported, and I would like to see the staff recommendation followed. Thank you.
Could I respond?
Thank you. I was going to invite Commissioner Rankin to provide the rationale for her motion, which was different than the one that had been proposed.
Last week when we discussed this, and it's also in this week's information, there's a breakdown of the impervious area by typical things that people do in their home. So from 0 to 2,500 is detailed, and I felt that between 500 and 700 new net impervious, there was a lot of things like porches and decks and sheds and stoops, and I felt that shouldn't trigger additional stormwater storage, and that I felt like when it started to transition to new additions and new single-family homes, that's when you look at the numbers and you look at 700, that's when it starts to be more prevalent, and I felt that was a better application of this rule. So that's why I suggested we switch it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well, my question was more in terms of the results on the neighbors. Why is it that you can put on things up to 700 without impacting your neighbors? And why is it that it's better to allow 700 than 500 I would think the impact on the neighbors was sufficiently greater at 700 additional square feet of impervious surface. So I believe that was the reason the staff was recommending it. It wasn't just for the convenience of the community, it was to protect neighbors. And so I'd like to have some explanation of why you don't need to protect the neighbors as much as the staff thought you did.
As I understood it, it wasn't, it was the other side of the coin, is that when you engage in the protection and require on-site stormwater detention, there is a cost to doing that to the person who has to provide it. And certainly with new construction, we're dealing with large amounts of new square footage. That's one thing. But I think last time, if I remember correctly, there was some discussion here about at what point in time do small projects actually trigger the need to provide on-site stormwater, and the associated cost to doing that might be viewed as unduly burdensome to those folks that just want to do what many would think would be a relatively small project. I think Commissioner Barnett's absolutely right. In an ideal world, it would be zero. And the minute you put a shovel in the ground, you would have to provide on-site storage. That would certainly be ideal. But I think what we're trying to do, what I understood the adjustment to be aimed at, was trying to achieve some balance, a little bit more balance in terms of what's a minor project and a major project. If I remember correctly, some of the thinking was that for projects above 700 feet, there's no magic to the number, above 700 square feet, there are likely to be larger projects, and the budgets for them are likely to be larger, and therefore having to provide additional on-site stormwater detention might not be as much of a burden as opposed to something that was smaller. Someone might never even bother doing the project because the cost of providing the on-site storage would be cost prohibitive. I'm not arguing that one way or the other, but I'm just relating, I think that was the thinking. And that previously had a 25-foot, 2,500 square foot new impervious space trigger, which wasn't capturing a lot of things that were causing additional issues. This was the whack-a-mole example that we talked about last time, where we're taking a lot of effort, spending a lot of money in the community trying to solve stormwater issues. We should, as much as possible, try not to create new ones, and therefore bring that threshold down. 500 was picked as the number. It could have been 6, could have been 7, could have been 1,000. My understanding is that based on questions from last week, we got some information for what the types of permits we've received and for what types of projects, trying to get an idea of when you could draw. It's not going to be perfect, but you could try to draw a line that would seek to strike a balance between a small project that might not be all that cost or dollar intensive to begin with, and running the risk that somebody might not even do the enhancement to their property because of the stormwater implications, which may or may not be a good thing. I think we'll find out with the experience how this works. But as Commissioner Barnett said, I think this is a major change going from 2,500 to 7. It's not 5, but my understanding of the reasoning behind it was an attempt to try to strike a balance between the cost and the impact. It's not perfect, and we may adjust it as we go down the road, as we see how things turn out, the cost of projects change. But that's my understanding of the basis behind it. I don't know if anyone else has a different perspective on it, Commissioner?
I think you hit it mostly, Mayor. I think I'm one of the more vocal advocates for this whole move in this direction, and as such, I really do. The question that remains unanswered is why at some level it's okay to change your neighbor's environment and at others it's not. And that's sort of the thing that remains unanswered. But this is a huge step forward and a major step forward that will do a world of good for an enormous number of our residents. And so while I may wish it was 0, perhaps Mr. Goodman does too, this step forward, if it takes this kind of a balancing act to acquire the necessary votes to move forward, is still a big step forward for the community and a big positive move for existing residents in defense of their conditions. So I see it as a positive even at 700. If somebody wanted to withdraw that, I'd be thrilled, but I also think it's a big step forward and it's worth doing even at 700, although 5 might have been better.
And could I just add some reference to costs? So when we saw examples of the on-site stormwater things that you have to do, it could range for 1,000 square feet of new storage, it could range from $2,000 to $13,000. So if someone is reaching that threshold, that's the additional cost that they will have to incur. And so I thought that there, like the mayor was saying, would be better suited to be a balance, so that we do gain the storage, but we don't do it maybe too early.
Right, the idea we did want to unduly prohibit or discourage people from enhancing their property, and yet still take very significant steps towards improving the requirement to maintain stormwater detention on site when someone does add additional impervious space. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree that this is a good step in the right direction, whether it's 500 or 700. This is still a move to help control flooding here in Downers Grove, and I think that that's a good thing for the entire community. And I'm happy to see it come forward, and I think we do need to understand that, as has been said before, 500 was an arbitrary figure to begin with. It could have easily been smaller, it could have been larger. If, as Commissioner Barnett said, 700 is where the votes lie, then let's go with it. We can always revisit it later. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the council? Even though I said a few things, I'll just add that I would have been fine with 5, but I'm also fine with 7. I understand the reasoning behind it. I think it does try to strike a balance. In reality, we're now going to see what our experience is going forward, and we may adjust it again, because obviously we're trying to maintain that balance of not being unduly cost burdensome on people who want to enhance their property, and yet being mindful of the community costs dealing with stormwater issues. So we may very well adjust that balance as we go forward and experience dictates. Other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passed unanimously. That brings us next to item 8B. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 13 of the Downers Grove Municipal Code, Health and Sanitation, regarding regulating sump pump/downspout discharge?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? I'll just thank staff for providing the information to answer some of the questions we had last time about how this was going to be addressed in terms of enforcement going forward. I think ultimately, as before, we'll see, but I appreciate the information, and I think I'm comfortable that this can be addressed in a relatively easy way. I guess we'll see what our experience is, and like with anything, we'll come back and adjust if needed. My thanks for the information. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The matter also passes unanimously. Brings us to item 8C as in Charlie. Do I have a motion to adopt the 2014 aggregate tax levy?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That passes unanimously. Brings us to item 8D as in David. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance levying of taxes for fiscal year commencing on the first day of January 2014 and ending on the 31st day of December 2014 for the Village Downers Grove Special Service Area Number 2, also known as the Downers Grove Downtown Service Area?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passed unanimously. Item 8E is in Edward. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance levying taxes for the fiscal year 2014 with respect to Special Service Area Number 4, also known as the Green Acres subdivision?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, the matter passes unanimously. Move on to item 8F as in Frank. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance levying taxes for fiscal year 2014 with respect to Special Service Area Number 5, also known as the Atwood subdivision?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That brings us to item 8G as in Gus. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance levying taxes for fiscal year 2014 with respect to Special Service Area Number 6, known as the Fairview Fire Protection District?
So moved.
Questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the village council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Brings us to item H, as in Henry. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance levying taxes for fiscal 2014 with respect to Special Service Area Number 7, known as the Dunham subdivision?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? May I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. That also passes unanimously. And the remaining items, 8I through Q, we will take together, since they all deal with abatements of property tax levies, which is essentially we levy a tax, but then through the abatement process, we do not collect that tax. So we've now levied taxes for the designated areas, the last items 8C through H. And now this is the abatement process where, because we have other funds available to cover some of these obligations that we just went through, we do not need to collect on the taxes we just levied. Why do we levy them in the first place? Well, that's a long conversation. It's a long story. That's the way it works in Illinois. This is the process we have to go through. That's the short answer. So do I have a motion to adopt ordinances 00-05793 through 00-05801 to adopt the abatements described in active agenda items I through Q?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Nobody usually ever has any problem with abatements. Any questions or comments from members of the village council? Have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. All those items pass unanimously. That brings us to the end of our active agenda and brings us to item 9 on our agenda, which is our first reading or our workshop agenda. We have 5 different items on tonight's workshop agenda. Our workshop or first reading agenda is designed for presentation and discussion of items. We typically do not act on any of these items at this point in time, but it's designed to discuss them, receive more information, comment from the public, and consideration by the council for action at a future point in time. As is customary, we ask our village staff to present each of these items for that discussion, and I will therefore turn things over to Village Manager David Fieldman for that presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Tully. The first item is continued discussion of the special use to permit residential condo development at 936 to 942 Maple. We were talking about this just a few weeks ago. This item was placed on another first reading to react to and discuss new information submitted by the petitioner. They have submitted, as requested, a fiscal and impact study or report and a couple different options for the sidewalk design along the front of the proposed building along Maple Avenue as it relates to the proposed loading zone. This information was prepared by the petitioner in response to council questions, and their attorney is here if you have any questions or comments about those pieces of new information. Of course, staff is also able to answer any questions you may have on information that was presented at the last meeting.
Thank you. Let me step out for a second and ask a question. How many of the folks in the audience here tonight, by show of hands, intend to comment on this item? Okay, we have quite a few. With your indulgence, and I want to make sure all of you are heard, what I'm going to ask is that we break tradition a little bit And I'm going to ask the village council if there are any factual questions about the new information that we'd like to ask, because I think it might be useful and helpful to the audience to have that additional information before commenting. And then we'll go to audience comment, and then we'll come back to the village council if everybody is okay with that. Since we do have a number of people here to speak, it might be useful to hear any additional information. So let me just start with inviting any members of the village council if there are any questions we have about the additional information or otherwise that might be worth having the audience here before we open it up to public comment.
I was just wondering, since we got this economic study, which I'm extremely grateful for, instead of highlighting what I think is important in this, because we've heard why people are objecting to it, and there is a portion of people that do support this, with this information through this economic study, is the petitioner going to be highlighting the facts of this, or is it just literally information purposes only?
Well, I guess the question to petitioner's council is whether petitioner's council wish to highlight or emphasize any portions of that study, or simply submit it as part of the record for digestion by the public and the council. And no obligation to highlight anything. I think it was just a question Commissioner Durkin was asking. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. For the record, David Sasson, back on behalf of the petitioner. The study that was completed is very detailed, and I think having an explanation or summary of a 32-page study probably would be helpful at this point in time. We asked Strategic Planning Associates, Mr. Hovani, to do a detailed study of what he felt the revenue generation and revenue repercussions and impact fiscally and economically would be from our proposed project. I'm sorry he couldn't be here tonight. When the meeting was changed, he's in another village tonight, and I could not get him. But I've talked to him and, of course, familiar with the study. Basically, what he found and what all of the graphs and charts show is that the property tax impact from the proposed development, if it was built, would change the property taxes on the property from $50,000 a year to approximately $544,836 per year of property taxes. Over a period of 10 years, he projected that $4.36 million of additional revenue would be generated for the governmental bodies with regard to this. The new construction value, which would be added to the community, would be $21 million, and he felt that the 118 projected new residents in the building, when it was completed in full, would generate another $16,000, $16,480 in per capita direct payments to the village from the state of Illinois. I think the final conclusion that he reached was that the total income from the project for the residents would be approximately $4.4 million, and that income then would be spent, certainly not all on Downers Grove, but significant parts of it would be spent in the local community where people live as an infusion to the economy. So I think those were his general conclusions. They were all positive, and certainly to summarize, we saw nothing in the report that indicated that there would be any burden on the village or any negative economic impact. It would all be positive. That's not to mention the construction jobs, and he indicated that, for example, just the labor portion of the construction would pay $7.3 million in wages to people working on the property, not counting, of course, the materials that go into it. So, and that would be a significant number of jobs. Those people come from the local community and from other communities as well, based on who the contractors are. So I think those are the conclusions of the study.
Thank you for that summary. Did any members of the commission decide?
Not so much a question for you, but I just wanted to say thank you to the Downtown Downers Grove Management Corporation and their board. We did get a letter from them yesterday that had a position on this condo development It actually gives a very interesting history of the property and how downtown management, whose job it is to try to find tenants and uses for properties within the downtown special service area. Their board took a look at this. They conferred with our plan commission and staff's extensive work, and one of the comments in here, similar to the economic information we just heard, was the economic impact of these residents with their disposable income and shopping experiences, dining, and everyday living amenities will enhance our award-winning downtown area. Now, that's just one comment from one organization in our community, but I think it's an interesting one to connect to this project, because downtown management is at the heart of our downtown in Downers Grove. So just to comment, if we could get this letter into the materials, the electronic materials for our next meeting, I think that would be beneficial for the residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, as long as you're there, any questions with respect to the economic impact study that was done, as long as counsel for the petitioner is there? Thank you, appreciate this on it. Any questions by counsel with respect to the new information? Commissioner Barnett?
Not so much new information, but I guess I'd like to get some clarification really from our staff. So bear with me. If the petitioner wanted to demolish the two existing structures now, would that require any particular review, approval, authorization beyond staff?
No, it would require demolition permits, which are handled pursuant to our code requirements by the village staff, so no council action or board action.
And criteria considered for those permits, the approval of those permits is really site safety, hauling, protection of peripheral structures and growth and vegetation, things like that, right?
That's absolutely correct. They are technical demolition requirements. They're not policy-based criteria.
Okay. And if the proposed structure was, the use of the proposed structure was office space, for instance, that too would remove it from the special use request, right?
That's correct. Commercial and office buildings, office uses are permitted in the district, and you just have to get a building permit.
Irrespective of size and square foot and height, correct?
Provided that all those things are within the maximums provided for under the downtown business district, that's correct.
So is it accurate to say then that the question asked of this body really is the various criteria used to consider a special use approval or not are really to be viewed within the question of as a residential use as opposed to some other by right authorized permitted use? Because the development itself meets all of our requirements. So if the petitioner was before us with an office building, we'd be not really having this hearing, right?
That is correct.
Okay. I guess I think that's, appreciate everybody's patience. I wanted to try and find a way to make that as clear as possible, because it speaks much to the various things that are up in front of us for consideration. The criteria that are in the special use could be broadly applied to a whole host of activities, pretty speculative. The question before us is as a residential use as opposed to another use.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
So those standards should be applied in this context.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the council with respect to the new information or anything you'd like to ask before we open it up?
Sorry, I've already got it. We have two new sidewalk renderings here. There's a 9-foot wide sidewalk that goes out to the loading zone, and there's also a sidewalk rendering with some curbs on the west and east portions of the property with a 4-foot planting strip. You know, this is going to be, is this sidewalk within the downtown SSA area that gets handled by our contracted snow removal company?
Yes.
So from my perspective, a 9-foot sidewalk is easier to control snow on than a small sidewalk and a grass median strip. So that's just, I guess, another comment, Mayor. Sorry, if not a question. Didn't mean to make you get up in your seat, but thank you for the amended sidewalk plans here. You know, a larger sidewalk does allow people to make a choice of where they walk, either closer to the loading zone or not, but certainly in Downers Grove, we have to be faced with snow, so that's something to consider in the sidewalk plan as well.
Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering if the petitioner could tell us if there's been any steps taken, whether they were fruitful or not, toward moving, relocating, in some way saving the Edwards house.
From the outset, we've made it clear that we would make that house available to any credible developer organization, historic preservation organization, only with the only caveat being timing. There may be matters that have gone on inside the village that I'm not aware of, but I am aware of two particular proposals that were made to move it very close and a little bit further, and both of them just failed to gather, I guess what I call any traction. They were looked at, they were considered, and it just did not develop with any real progress. And it's been over a period of a number of months since we started this project. So I think the answer probably is there were some, but no real promising opportunities.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Just to pick up on that, though, we may be hearing more about that topic here tonight, I suspect. But one thing I want to emphasize is, and I don't know if Commissioner Jose was going this direction or not, the village staff has been extraordinarily cooperative in trying to make those efforts work. Extraordinary being probably too soft of a word, and certainly has been willing to move heaven and earth, for lack of a better phrase, to try to support those efforts.
That's precisely where I was going.
I thought you might, you were being far too modest. Very creative proposals and whatnot. I suspect we're going to hear a little bit more about it soon, since Kat is now running around on the floor and the bag's back there.
I've been to three. I've been to 3 meetings.
Yeah. Right.
Where that's a topic.
I think there's probably more to it than that, and with all due respect to you, you
Yes.
probably were privy to all of it.
Oh, I have no doubt.
I didn't want the effort to be shortchanged by description that was limited by your, obviously, involvement, being that it's not primarily the reason why you're engaged in this matter.
Well, no, and I fully understand that
I
council wouldn't
I know you
necessarily
fully
be
understand
involved in each one, but I thought it useful to demonstrate whether or not the petitioner had been involved in at least some efforts to move the house.
Yeah, I would agree with that characterization, as certainly the petitioner's also been fully cooperative in the efforts that have been underway. Other questions of the council before we open it up to public comment? Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to open this up for public comment. To anyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment with respect to this item, which is the special use, the request for a special use to permit a residential condominium development in the downtown business zoning district at 936, 942 Maple Avenue. I suspect we may hear a lot of things. We've already been guilty of doing it ourselves. But this is, as I think Commissioner Barnett pointed out, first and foremost, a discussion of whether or not criteria for a special use have been met or not. But there are some ancillary topics which I'm sure we'll get into. Good evening.
Hi, Mayor, Commissioners. We are Michael and May Bain. We've been residents of Downers Grove for 27 years, and we are here tonight really to introduce ourselves to you, and are speaking first, although we were going to speak last, based on the topic that just was brought up. We are the couple that sent you all an email a couple weeks ago, a rather lengthy email, talking about the relocation of the Edwards house, as we came forward and offered a potential possibility of doing so because we own property at 621 Maple, a little more than a quarter mile east on Maple Avenue of the Edwards home, and we presented to you a potential option to relocate the Edwards house onto our property there. We can go into as much detail as you wish to right now. We have done about 8 weeks of due diligence with various contractors, subcontractors, with village administration. Met with a home mover 3 times, with the village administration, with the arborist, village arborist. Looked at the house, the condition of the Edwards house, the cost of moving, met with Commonwealth Edison, met with Comcast. We've done significant due diligence over the past several weeks. And finally have come to a realization. We waited to present anything, didn't present at the past meetings because all of our due diligence was not done. We are there right now, and we believe, May and I believe very strongly, that this is a real option if the community wants to do so. There are some concerns we understand about trees. We know that's been presented to you also. We have studied that with the home mover. By the way, the home mover we are talking about using is the one that has recently moved the home near McCormick Place, one of the largest moves in the country. Very reputable company out of Indiana. We've had numerous conversations with them, and he has also met with people from the village. So we just wanted to present ourselves to you so you know who we are. And this is something we feel passionate about, that we believe that the home should be saved. We support the development and support the home. Our background, I'm an architect, I'm a builder, I'm a structural engineer. I'm aware of projects like this, and this is something, the community is our community. We think the Edwards home belongs in our community and would be great sitting at 621 Maple over on Maple and Elmwood, should you wish to take that as a potential solution. Anything?
Well, Mr. Payne, I appreciate you introducing yourself to everyone. Since the teaser was put out there, I'm glad that you at least explained what we were talking about. Although I do want to emphasize that this proposal is not what is on tonight's agenda. What's on tonight's agenda is a petition, a request by a petitioner through our rules to receive approval for a special use. It is not a proposal to do anything vis-a-vis moving the Edwards house. Since it was put out there, we thought it would be important for people to know that there are efforts to see if it would be possible. We're not there yet, but the village has tried to be as cooperative as possible. But decisions that would be involved in that are not the subject of tonight's agenda. So notwithstanding the fact that, like I said, the cat is running around the room and the bag is in the back, we really need to focus tonight's discussion on the petition that is before us, which is a request for a special use, and therefore focus our comments on the criteria for a special use and any conditions that might be imposed under our ordinance with respect to the grant of any such special use. So with that, I will not ask you to go into any more detail, not at this point in time. But thank you for introducing yourselves, and just as an aside, thank you for all the efforts you've undertaken to pursue this.
Just to be clear, Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
My intent was not necessarily just to let the cat out of the bag. That was sort of a side event. I thought it was important to note that there had been other efforts as well, as the petitioner talked about, whether it's moving the house close by or a little further down the road. This is not something that they've taken lightly, something that we've taken lightly. And obviously, it's not something the community is taking lightly. So, thank you for your
Agreed, but also I think everyone has been careful not to unduly set expectations when it's a very complicated process. And again, not the topic of tonight's discussion. If I haven't said that once, I've said it 3 times. But I think everyone understands why we need to focus on the actual petition before us and the parameters. With that, sir, good evening.
Good evening. My name is Scott Lazar. I'm the owner of 808 Maple Avenue. I have lived there for the last 8.5 years. I'm encouraged by the news of potential people interested in moving the house, but not here to discuss that. I'm here to support this owner's plan to develop the property as presented. This provides significant benefit to Downers Grove. It's an attractive high-end development that will increase tax revenues and provide a much-needed boost to our downtown businesses. The plans are consistent with zoning. The plans comply with the design guidelines from the comprehensive plan, and the developers have been proactively addressing every concern raised by the village through this process. I'm in favor of this development, and I believe most residents of Downers Grove are as well, despite the numbers you may see today. That said, you're not going to see a steady stream of pro-development folks take to the podium. And the reason is we shouldn't have to. The law, the facts are on our side. This is a development that's not only compliant with all special use requirements, it also represents the type of progress that Downers Grove needs. The organizers of a lot of the protests are the same folks that are still trying to force an historic district on Maple Avenue against the clear wishes of the neighborhood. Likewise, they're hoping to pressure the council to disregard basic fundamental property rights of the owner of 936 and 942 Maple Avenue. We have a lot of smart, passionate people that frankly could be adding more value to the debate, but they're not seeking solutions, they're not coming up with new ideas, with this house move as an exception. They're largely being obstructionists. I would argue, despite the signatures, despite sincere outpouring of emotion, there have not been any real legitimate efforts made to save these buildings. The for sale sign on these properties have been up now for 6-7 months. Yet no other offer was made to the bank to buy it. Nobody, I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, petitioned the city to buy it. No efforts were made to try to change zoning. So far, nobody's been willing to raise the money to move the house. Maybe there's new news there, which the owners have offered to give away. When it comes down to it, nobody's been willing to sort of put their money where their mouth is. On December 5th, a question was posed via social media to one of the principal organizers of the Save 942 Maple campaign. The question is as follows. I'm all for preservation, just a question, if you do get the permit denied and the house gets saved, who's going to spend the money to restore it? The answer is, if the special use permit is denied, we would hope that we can get the bank to list the two homes as unique office opportunities and market them as the historical properties they are. Think about this. As of 4 days ago, the only alternative plan from the folks that have organized all of this is to have the bank relist the property. No reasonable alternative use has been brought forward. The reality is there aren't a lot of good alternatives to the current plans before you. One can sort of highlight fond memories of the family members that once lived there, but the family sold the house. One can point to the fact that it was most recently used as a business rental property, but that fell into foreclosure. We have a property owner here today who isn't just talking, but is doing and is willing to take real risk and put real money into the community. And most of us are thankful that someone has come forward with a plan, and a good plan at that. I understand progress can be difficult at times, but I think the law is clear. Sentimentality should not get in the way of progress, should not get in the way of development, and should not trump property rights. Facts should drive your decision tonight, and the facts are the plans are consistent with zoning, they comply with the design guidelines for the comprehensive plan, they meet the requirements of special use permit, and the developers have addressed every concern raised by the village and continue to do so as new ones arise. With this development, Downers Grove wins. It's attractive high-end development that will increase tax revenues and provide a much-needed boost to our downtown businesses. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Lazar. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening.
Hi. My name is Ken Lerner. I'm at 4933 Whiffen Place in Downers Grove. I am one of the obstructionists referred to by the previous speaker. I just wanted to summarize a little bit some of the written comments that I had submitted earlier that I know everyone has had the pleasure of reading, and talk a little bit about the new information since last week, the economic analysis. Just summarize our previous comments on behalf of myself and the Pierce Downer Heritage Alliance. First of all, a lot of attention has been directed by the petitioner and staff to the notion that the proposal meets other aspects of the zoning code, height and bulk requirements and so forth. And it has been raised this evening that the proposal might meet all of the zoning requirements if it were a different proposal. But this petitioner's action that is before the council now requires a special use requirement, which is also part of the zoning code. It's a zoning requirement too, and that is a separate requirement that also has to be met for this particular proposal, and of course, that's why we're all here. It has to meet 3 tests in particular in the code. It has to be consistent with and in substantial compliance with all village council policies and plans. It must be necessary or desirable to provide a service or a facility that is in the interest of public convenience and will contribute to the general welfare of the neighborhood or community. And it must not be detrimental to the health, safety, or general welfare of persons residing or working in the vicinity, or be injurious to property values or improvements in the vicinity. Those things are all in the code. Failing any one of these 3 tests is grounds for denial. We, of course, feel that it fails all 3 of those tests, and it's broken down more or less piece by piece in the written comments that we submitted earlier. I just want to hit a few highlights. The consistent with all policies and plans part is clearly where the comprehensive plan of the village comes in. It's certainly, the comprehensive plan is certainly part of the village's policies and plans regarding development and land use, clearly a central part. And so when the comprehensive plan calls for mixed-use developments downtown or identifies the concept of transition zones surrounding the central business district, and I know this area is not zoned as part of the transition zone, but the reality is that this block really fits that description very well based on what is there now. Or when the plan defines certain areas that are targeted for residential development, not including this area, those all become relevant to the evaluation of this proposal. And we feel that none of those aspects of the comprehensive plan support granting this petition. Second criterion, necessary or desirable in the interest of public convenience. That's where one might consider whether this project fills some unmet need. Neither the petitioners nor the staff report contain a housing study talking about whether there is some unmet need for this type of development. On the other hand, we think there is ample evidence, and I think others will speak to this, that there is that the project might be considered redundant with other existing or planned developments that have come before the council or have been built in recent times, that some of which went through, some of which have a lot of vacancies now, some of which failed or failed partway through or from the get-go. The last criterion refers to potential detrimental effects. The detrimental effect on the King's property seems pretty clear. I think that's been recognized. And by not being consistent in scale and use with the other properties on this block, and by destroying potentially historic properties, there clearly is a detriment to the neighborhood and to the village as a whole, really. The village desires to change the character of this neighborhood. I would suggest that the village should go ahead and condemn all the properties on that side of the block and then seek proposals for a consistent type of development rather than allowing sort of one sore thumb development to make the rest of the block awkward for the other properties. In terms of the economic analysis, I just have a few remarks. It has a lot of glowing conclusions, and clearly a lot of effort went into it, as you might expect. We feel that the evidence does not back up some of those conclusions, and I'll just point to a couple things. First, of course, it is based on the assumption that the project will actually be built and that all the units will sell at the planned price. That may be an assumption you have to make to do a study, but we feel that it's important to recognize that that is an assumption, and we can't necessarily anticipate that that would necessarily occur given some of the history of downtown developments. There is a statement in the executive summary that talks about the advantages to the downtown area. It says that the new residents will spend $3.5 million a year much of which can be captured by the downtown. There isn't any evidence presented there to support that particular claim, and in fact, later on, a more detailed analysis suggests otherwise. On page 11 in the analysis, there's an analysis of sales tax revenue, which says that about 20% of income is spent on convenience goods and 10% of income is spent on comparison goods. And then it goes on to say what fractions of those incomes would anticipated to be made within the municipality of Downers Grove to generate sales tax revenue. The upshot is when you do the math, you get 19% of the total income spent, and that's within the municipality as a whole. That includes cars, appliances, groceries, all these, everything that would fall within Downers Grove, but not as part of, necessarily as part of the downtown area. Those types of businesses don't exist in the downtown area. On page 32, table 16 of the report shows some of the types of expenditures that might be served by the downtown area, eating out, apparel, and entertainment that might be relevant for downtown, and those add up to about 13% of total household expenditures. And, there again, what fraction of that would really be captured by downtown businesses? When you get down to it, we're talking about 118 people out of, how many thousands of people who live within easy walking or driving distance to the downtown area now. I wouldn't deny that there might be some benefit, clearly there would be some having additional people. But to say that it, a substantial fraction of $3.5 million a year, I think would be captured downtown seems like an exaggeration. There are also some rosy assumptions about how much of the design, overhead, and construction costs would be captured by Downers Grove. I would note there that the developer is not local. The architectural firm doing the design work is based in Atlanta. And so there doesn't seem to be any particular reason to think that, much of the construction work or workers would be from Downers Grove in particular. Lastly, in the real estate tax analysis, interestingly, it shows a detailed analysis for the school districts and how they will make out based on expected revenues and expected extra costs that would be incurred. But that reasoning is not carried through into the part about what the village's portion of the property tax revenues, where there's no consideration of increased expenses. Additional residents presumably would require additional village services, police and fire protection. They're going to drive on the roads, and there will be increased cost to the village. It would be interesting to see, how that balances off against the expectation of increased revenues. All that being said, I think it stands to reason that if the proposal were built, the village probably would come out ahead in terms of tax revenue versus expenses. The analysis gives an annual total of increased property tax revenue to the village of several tens of thousands of dollars a year. I think if that number probably should be discounted based on some of the rosy assumptions I talked about. But even discounted, you're talking about probably several thousand or maybe a few tens of thousands of dollars a year increased property tax revenue to the village. Not chicken feed, but neither is it a make or break proposition for whether the village is going to survive or be able to meet its budget. The essence of good planning, we suggest, is to obtain the benefits of redevelopment without sacrificing the quality of life and long-term viability of the neighborhood that this proposal would, we feel, impair. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Lerner. Any questions of Mr. Lerner from members of the council? And we did get you materials in advance, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
It's helpful to review them before tonight. Thank you. Other questions or comments? Good evening.
Bill White, 4729 Cecilia Avenue. First, a couple of initial comments. It's my personal opinion that this project is wildly too big for the site. It just doesn't fit. I've looked at all the pictures. That said, I believe it's also unfortunate that this current zoning is read the downtown business rather than downtown transition. And to some extent, that may be water under the bridge, but I believe that represents a massive failure of prior planning, that this should be a transition area. Now, maybe prior mistakes by planning has allowed that where you can't change that fact, but this should be a transition zone. But that's not what I'm mostly here to talk about. I'm mostly here to talk about the desirability of a maximally sized condominium building at this location. We have to keep, I believe the council should keep in context that this is not the only multifamily project planned for downtown Downers Grove. And there's issues of market saturation. Last Thursday night, I heard plans to put 200 condominiums right where we're standing now. Adjacent to this property, if this project's allowed, there'd be no reason to deny a similar request for properties immediately to the east and immediately to the west of this particular address. That adds another 50. 5100 Forest is an ideal location. If this proposal was for 5100 Forest, I'd be double thumbs up, go for it. If you make it bigger, go ahead, because that is away from the transition zone. My concern is one of market saturation, that once this project is approved, will that block other developers who want to build maximally sized condominium projects at locations that are more desirable for the village? Part of the special use planning should be to locate maximum sized condominium developments at those locations within the downtown district that best benefit the entire community. And there are better places in downtown Downers Grove to place a 5-story building, 70-foot tall building of this size than at this location. And I suggest that we need to consider what the maximum capacity is of the downtown region. Is it 300? Is it 500? Is it 150? By putting 50 here, we are very likely, from market conditions, blocking 50 going somewhere where it may be a better place for it. And my final comment on this is, I think we really need to be concerned whether this project will succeed. If you looked at 29 Forest Avenue, that took a long time to finally sell out. Acadia on the Green took forever to sell out. If this project is partially built, because market conditions haven't been taken into account, it's going to be a permanent eyesore. So basically, what I want to focus on is whether, I believe the purpose of the special use is to determine whether this location is the best location for a maximally sized condominium building in downtown Downers Grove, knowing that downtown streets cannot absorb an infinite number of units. The traffic study for this property talks about a 1% increase. But if you aggregate that with all the other developments that are planned, there's going to be a lot more than 1% increase, because this is not the only condo building we hope gets built. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Other questions or comments? I know we have quite a few.
Yes.
Welcome back, Dr. Goodman.
Hello again, Mayor. I have a brief... Oh, yes, thank you. I'm Gordon Goodman. I live at 5834 Midoff. I have a brief statement of my own, and then I have a statement that Mr. Jim Cavallo, who isn't able to be here tonight, has prepared and authorized me to present. And again, as I did last time, if you would, I'd be pleased to make part of my statement and then part after other people have spoken. Is that what you'd like, or would you like me to go ahead with? Well, let me start, and then you tell me when I get to that point. Right. My brief statement is to point out a couple of things that have been implicit in what we've heard up to now, but I want to call attention to them. And that it follows on Commissioner Barnett's comment that about an alternative development at this site. And the implication of that is that should you find that the criteria for special use are not satisfied here, it doesn't mean that this site will give up all of the economic benefits which have been reported to you as flowing from this. In particular, you should look at a reduction in the residential benefits But keep in mind that the other construction and tax benefits would flow from a redevelopment of this site, even one that might be built in the manner that Douglas Gilbert described redevelopments of historic properties in Oak Park, and preserve the original historic property built up around it. There's plenty of room in back of these properties, and an expansion of office facilities and other things that are compatible with the zoning is quite possible. But this proposal has come to you as a residential proposal. There are many reasons why having such a major residence on the periphery of the business zone has to be studied very thoroughly, and why you have special use criteria to find out whether that is really appropriate. So that's what I wanted to move on to, is the special use criteria. In particular, I wanted to call attention to the staff evaluation of these defects that we've pointed out in it. On page 3 of the green sheets that are now white, the summary sheets that are distributed to the public, there are enumerated issues, and then the staff has responded to those issues. I don't want to deal with all of them, but I do want to discuss the fourth one. The development is not necessary or desirable. And as Mr. Lerner pointed out, that is something that is required, positive finding for that. And it's been pointed out in testimony you've heard, and the Plan Commission heard, that there are other properties of this sort, condominium properties, that haven't been successful here. It isn't necessary to have another one. In fact, Mr. White pointed out that it actually may preclude more desirable developments. So there's a real case about whether it is desirable to build this sort of condominium in this location. But what was the staff evaluation of that testimony that you've received and the Plan Commission received? The proposed development is desirable because it brings additional permanent residents to the downtown, which in turn can foster additional economic growth downtown. That's completely off the mark. That's not what we were arguing. That's not a reason whether it's desirable, this type of development at this location. It's a condominium development. And, well, at any rate, I'm pointing out to you that the staff has not addressed the arguments that were submitted. This is not a response to that evidence. The evidence still stands. We have proved that this is not necessary or desirable at this location. The petitioner and the staff have not refuted that testimony. The next one is that the development will negatively impact property values in the area. The staff says that the petitioner has testified that they studied similar developments in surrounding communities and found the developments of this type do not diminish property. Well, it was a real estate expert who stood before the Plan Commission, and he said he studied 400 properties, but he did not say that this did not produce a decrease in values. He said he did note in other communities there have been similar conditions in which vacancies did exist or developments were partially completed projects, but comparing the data, he concluded the market was improving in general, and while pockets of oversupply existed, these pockets were being reasonably absorbed in an appropriate period of time. He explained the range of detrimental conditions that properties may have and provided examples for the same. He found no evidence that the project would have an adverse effect on the community or adjacent property owners because similar conditions exist in other communities. I'm afraid I don't really understand what he meant by that. He offered no figures, no details of his study, and it certainly did not, that phrasing did not find that developments of this type do not diminish adjacent property values. If I read correctly, he said there is an impact on neighboring property values, but after a while, in other communities, the same thing exists, and he isn't worried about it. So I think that evidence that we have submitted on the development will negatively impact property values in the area has not been refuted, and I hope that you'll examine that when you have an opportunity to ask the petitioner about it and what evidence they've provided. That concludes the part of my statement, and I could go on or I can sit down, whichever you prefer.
Let me interrupt you just for 1 second, Dr. Goodman. I appreciate your comments. I just want to make clear that the approval criteria for a special use is set out in section 12.050H of our chapter 28 of our zoning ordinance. And while staff certainly makes conclusions and makes recommendations, at the end of the day, the language reads that no special use, this is the preamble to the 3 criteria that everyone's focusing on. It states that no special use may be recommended for approval or approved unless the respective review or decision-making body, that's this council, determines that the proposed special use is consistent with and in substantial compliance with all village council policies and plans, and that the applicant has presented evidence to support each of the following conclusions. And then 3 conclusions have been recited previously. I won't read them. The reason why I repeat that is because at the end of the day, while staff makes a recommendation, we have a plan commission that's made a recommendation. It is this body that is the decision-making body that determines whether or not the evidence supports or doesn't support each of the criteria. And it should also be clear, because it says in what I just read, that is ultimately the applicant's obligation to present the evidence to support each of those conclusions. That comes straight out of the ordinance. So I only wanted to remove staff from the middle of that because while we certainly value their professional involvement and expertise, they are not the advocates one way or the other of this. They simply reach conclusions for our benefit. Ultimately, it's our decision based on the evidence, and it is clearly ultimately the obligation and the burden is upon the applicant to present evidence that is persuasive to us that each of the criteria has been met.
Thank you. I entirely agree with that statement, and my purpose was...
Not a question of agreement, that's what it says.
Right. I mean, I was trying to make a similar point, that although the staff has summarized what has happened up to now in the way that I just examined, it is my judgment, and I hope it'll be your judgment, that evidence has not been provided by the petitioner to support the either the need and desirability or the lack of adverse effect on the neighborhood. And I wanted to express my judgment that you have heard already substantial evidence from members of your public that those criteria are not met, that there is not a need nor a desirability for this particular project in this location, and that it will have a negative impact on the neighborhood. And I just wanted to ask you to look carefully at the evidence which has been submitted to you, both by people proposing this development and people opposing it. Thank you. That
Understood, and I wasn't arguing with you, I was just simply providing a framework for the decision, just as a reminder. I understand very clearly, I think we all understand very clearly, what evidence you are arguing and how you are characterizing that evidence. That comes across loud and clear. If I may ask, because I'm always a fan of, I think, having different speakers break up the pattern actually keeps the discussion more lively, even though your next statement will be on behalf of Mr. Cavallo. If I could ask you to return a little bit later in the sequence, so we have other speakers, or maybe even other viewpoints out there. We've heard a couple different perspectives already. I'd appreciate it.
I'd be glad to. Thank you.
Thank you for your indulgence.
There are no questions about what I've said, other than yours, I hope. Or would someone else like a further clarification?
I'm not seeing any requests. I think
Thank you.
the message was delivered very clearly. Thank you. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Lillian Moats, and I live at 1100 Maple Avenue. I have a very brief comment to make about traffic. I understand that there was a traffic study done. My understanding when that report was initially read was that the two intersections, one at Maple and Main and one at Maple and Washington, were observed twice, once on a weekend day and once during the week. I, however, have occasion almost every week to travel that stretch from a little bit west of Main Street to Washington and Maple, where I make a left turn. I do this during morning rush hour, afternoon rush hour, and twice in between. And I can say that the conclusion of the study that was that there would be minimal impact, 1% impact, seems unimaginable to me, and that there is a glut of traffic at both intersections. The intersection at Washington and Maple, people get very impatient. It's a four-way stop. They're backed up, and it's already tense. We have a great deal of difficulty backing out of our driveway, which is, as I said, at 1100 Maple, about halfway down the block to Carpenter, because traffic, as it is now, is backed up two-thirds of the way from Carpenter to Main Street. So we have to rely on the goodness of some driver to let us out of our drive. The idea that there isn't going to be much impact of this very large building is just hard for me to take at face value. I don't know what conclusion or what solution the village would come up with if indeed it turns out that traffic study is wrong. I certainly hope that the idea of widening Maple Avenue would not be something under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your comments. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kathleen Drennan, 840 Maple. I've lived there for 30 years, and I'm opposed to that building going up there. It takes me at least 5 minutes to back out of my driveway right now, and I think that's going to add a lot to the congestion there. I also think that the ambiance of the village and the ambiance, just the way the village feels, would change. And I may be like one of those sentimental people that he's talking about before that thinks about, I'm not talking about facts and figures right now. I'm talking about how I feel about the village. The village feels charming and nice, and people come to the village because they enjoy the old homes and they enjoy the ambiance of the village and how charming it is. And I think that this building would destroy that. And I am opposed to it for a lot of reasons. I'm opposed to tearing the Edwards house down. And this is about, that building though right now. And I just feel that the added traffic And that large building overshadowing the neighborhood would destroy the neighborhood. And I don't think that, no matter how much money it brings in, I think that the people come to our town because they think it's a cute town. People, tell me, oh, your town is so cute, it's nice, but that big building on the corner there, it's going to cause a lot of trouble with traffic. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. Good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, and staff. Yeah, I'm Irene Hoekstrom, and we reside at 1232 Gilbert Avenue. I'd like to start out by saying I'm not an economist, but I am speaking as a resident with a master's level of education. And the economic impact analysis is obviously a boilerplate analysis with several glaring typos in it. It's nice to know this development will circulate wealth within Western Springs. It's a first error. The additional typo on page 2 of a value of $395 million instead of $395,000. When an analysis can't get the decimal point correct, it makes me immediately question the validity of their numbers and analysis. Let me remind you that this boom to Downers Grove economy only happens if all 55 units are sold. According to Zillow, the median price of a home sold in Downers Grove is $291,000. Who is downsizing to a condo for something that is more expensive than their home? My husband and I are baby boomers, and our friends are not retiring to downtown Downers. I don't know of any of our friends who would pay more for a condo than for what they sell their own home for as they near retirement. And for those that this would be a step down in price, they are retiring to downtown Chicago, out of state, and even out of the country. So it is priced too high also for someone starting out. It is priced for a couple in their prime, and why would they buy a condo when they can have a house with a yard for their kids? We're losing a valuable home and a heritage tree for something that has not been properly vetted. Since we are speculating on the success of this development and basing it on an economic analysis that is flawed, I will venture to say that this development will take away from local business. Businesses that were previously at 942 Maple would have employees who might work out at lunchtime or after work, and now with the fitness room in the building, there's no need to join a local fitness center. Businesses in 942 Maple would use a local restaurant for a holiday or business get-together. And now with the party room, no one needs to rent the party room at Emmett's. So I'll also venture that they won't have it catered at a downtown restaurant, but rather they'll purchase their party food at one of the chains that are located outside of Downers. As a landscape architect, I also want to comment on the green roof and landscaping. I do praise the architect for including a green roof in the design, since Downers Grove does not have any sustainability requirements. I realize the architect is from Georgia and not familiar with our plant materials. And that brings me back to the economic analysis, where on page 26 it states that almost $500,000 will be spent towards local firms for planning and design, and yet we have a firm from Georgia that designed this building. So far, not one person employed by this project has been from Downers Grove, so from the get-go, the projected economic windfall is inaccurate. I'm concerned about the success of this green roof because it will only get morning sunlight from the east. It is surrounded on the south, west, and north sides by 4 stories of building. It will be in shade most of the day. There are not many plants that will do well in this situation. There are 5 different evergreen ground covers specified in the plan for the green roof. There are only 2 that I can think of, Euonymus fortunii and Vinca minor, that will grow in heavy shade. And both of these species are on the invasive species watch lists. It is green in name only and will not be a sustainable landscape. Also in the planting plan are flowering evergreens. Rhododendrons and azaleas don't thrive here. Plants native to Illinois should be used. I want to conclude with one final comment. Those of you who approve this special use permit will most definitely lose my vote and the votes from many of those in this room, the nearly 2,000 Facebook followers, and those who have signed the petition. So I hope you'll at least think of that when you are voting on this permit. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Robert King, and I live at 946 Maple Avenue. The previous two speakers who spoke about the traffic on Maple Avenue, I couldn't concur more. I sit there on my front room, the sun porch, and watch the morning traffic during the rush hour, and it's horrendous. From Main Street to Washington Street, it's backed up. And to build this complex at this place, excuse me, on Maple Avenue is ludicrous. You've got the Lincoln School Park District there, the people coming and going all day long. You have the First Baptist Church school there where parents drop off their children in the morning, pick them up in the afternoon. They have to sit there and wait to get out. I can't conceive this being an improvement to the traffic on Maple. It is backed up in the morning and the evening. In the morning it's backed up all the way to Main Street, in the evening it's backed up all the way to Washington Street. So think about that and use your conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ed Olson, and I reside at 5138 Lee Avenue here in Downers Grove. My wife and I moved here just 3 years ago, and we were brought here because of the charm and character of this village, the numerous trees, wildlife, vegetation, what have you. I would like to start off by saying that some 30 years ago, I was involved in the construction of the, if I can call it, a 1.5-story office building just immediately to the east of this proposed development. There's a sign in front that states it's the Pyburn Schultz office building. I was a young draftsman at that time, and our goal in the construction of that building was to satisfy the needs of the owners of that, and also to keep the character of the surrounding homes on the street, not to build out in front of anybody, but to stay within the setback rules that the village had at that time, and I'm not sure if anything has changed in those 30 years. But a lot of care was taken in the construction of that building to make it fit, and I think it was a very nice fit with a modern building, with modern conveniences for its owner. But I ask the council and the leaders of this community is, what is your vision for Maple Avenue? If we start with this 5-story condominium development, is your anticipation in the future that this shall continue to move east along Maple Avenue and eventually reach Fairview Avenue? Is that what the vision is? Because I think right now you're setting a little bit of a precedence if you go ahead with this. And I ask, there is a business located in a former residence at the northeast corner of Washington and Maple. What would happen if that property comes up for sale in the next couple of years? Would you entertain the thought of another 50-story development going up there? And would the neighbors who live to the east of that, would they appreciate I think right now, you've got Maple Avenue as a very nice street. It's a buffer zone between the harsh commercial development that's along Main Street. It's got a semi-residential feel to it. You've got a church, you've got Lincoln Center in that, which is all transitioning down into the residential neighborhood, which is what it should do in a perfect world. If you bear with me just one moment. There's no doubt that the proposed building is grandiose. It's enormous. It does not fit the site. It's not a zero lot line building, but it sure isn't far from it. A nice building like this should really sit in a nice location. And we do have other locations in town. The properties might not be for sale at this time, but the first thing that hits my mind is Warren Avenue and Main Street, the northwest corner, which is currently the Starbucks. How nice would this building look at that location if the property was for sale? It would be a perfect framing of the intersection. Somebody owns this property with 2 homes on it now. And why is such a large development asking for permission to build on this location? Well, if you think about it, the bottom line is profit. Somebody who builds a building needs to make a profit. Nobody's in business to lose money. With that in mind, somebody making a profit on this and then leaving town, they've forever changed the face of Maple Avenue. It's not going to go back to looking what it looks like today. And I'm not saying that you have to keep everything the way it is. We're in a world where change is evident. But this development is just way too big for this location. And I'll have to say that Mr. Saxon has dangled a very nice carrot in front of you and saying that look at all the additional revenues from property taxes to sales taxes, economic development that this is going to bring to the village. But we have to think about this. Is this the right thing to do? Is this the right thing at the right place for this community? I really don't think it is. And as somebody just previously said, that Mr. Saxon indicated that this development was going to bring local workers into the community. Well, I'm sorry, but, you come into town with an architect's nameplate on a set of drawings and plans from Atlanta, Georgia. That's not local. And I would say right off, that's almost like an insult to us when you say that we're going to provide for the local workers. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you
for your time.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Excuse me, sir. What year did you say that building that you were a draftsman at was built? What year was that again?
I looked at the date that we had on the drawings and specifications. That was 1982.
82.
So my memory would say somewhere 82, 83.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And I'm not in the business of doing residential architecture today, so, I'm not looking for work.
Thank you.
That would have been an odd commercial if that's what your intent was. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Alex Martin. I live at 701 Maple. We recently just moved there. I would just like to say first that this is not my mom's opinion like most other kids. This is my very own opinion.
Good for you.
We have just moved from near Ogden to Maple Street, and we did near the beginning of the school year. And so far, the people have been nice. We do not need an apartment building putting in new people that we do not know, and for all we know, teenagers. No offense to any teenagers here. We already have not built apartment buildings downtown, Downers Grove, around that area. I walk past there near every day in the summer, and it just disgraces me. I do not want that house torn down and then replaced like that. Well, if it is torn down, I know it won't end up like that, but I just don't want to take chances. I am not just saying that I dislike the condos or apartments. I am a kid. I like new things. But the apartment does not belong on a street that took years to make and give itself character. I do not go to Whittier, so we have to drive to school. Every day I am near late, so I know I could leave at a different time, but the traffic is bad enough, and do we need more? I have been told that it would go up slightly, but I have seen enough in my lifetime, like most folks here, to know that it will go up at a rapid pace. We will need to take down 2 trees to put that apartment building up. I catch the news every now and then, and a lot of it is about how we're destroying the environment. I disagree with the environment part, but we do not need to take down those 2 trees. As a proud citizen of Downers Grove, I have a right to vote and hopefully change your mind. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alex. Those were well-crafted and well-delivered comments. Thank you for sharing those. I think Commissioner Olson might have some competition down the road for the youngest member of the village council.
I'd welcome it.
Other questions or comments? Good evening.
It's pretty tough to follow the kid. But my name is Hillary Denk. I live at 433 Wilson Street. I first want to submit the additional signatures that have been received on the petition and comments. We're at 704 signatures. And again, the vast majority are from Downers Grove, but the others from out of state are people who used to live here or family that live here and are concerned about the character of our town and number of issues that relate directly to the special use permit criteria. I'd like to say that the petition process and the Facebook page and also the most recent website have been a terrific way of educating our public about this process and the special use permit. We have shared that criteria with the people who are interested in this issue, and I would like to also address some specific concerns that I don't see in the additional materials or in the report by the village. There have been a number of people who have raised issues about safety. I have not seen anybody address the safety of having a loading zone on the parkway on Maple Avenue. It still exists in the current plans. Now there's a little strip of grass. I don't think that addresses the concerns people have. Why is there a loading zone necessary at all on our parkway? Again, this is going to be a traffic issue as well that is not discussed in any way in your traffic study. Vans, moving trucks, whatever may be coming in and out of the traffic, creating some really serious problems on a narrow road, not too far from the intersection. And so I don't see any way that that's been addressed. So I'm quite concerned about that. I'm also concerned about parking. We're talking about 118 people living in this facility and about, 72 parking spaces? And we're talking high-end. This is a high-end development. So if you've got more than one adult in those buildings, which with the 2 or 3 bedrooms, you're going to have more than one adult. Where are those other cars going to be? Are they going to be in the parking ramp? Are they going to be on a street somewhere? What's going to happen to them? You are not accommodating the cars of the people who actually live in this facility. Is that something that the village wants to do? We want to approve a building that doesn't even have enough parking for its residents? I'm very concerned about that. I also have a question about this economic report. I'm curious if other condo projects in the village have received the same kind of economic reports before they've been approved. It seems full of fluff, frankly. Not a lot of information that really talks about what happens in Downers Grove. What has happened in Downers Grove since these other condo complexes have been built? Have those residents actually added anything to our downtown? I see lots of vacancies. We all see lots of vacancies in our downtown. We don't have a lot of the developments that you see in a lot of other downtown areas. And I see places like Lombard and Elmhurst that have a lot of condo complexes in downtown, and they have empty streets. So I think we really need a lot more information before we decide to approve yet another condominium complex. So I'm very concerned about that. And, you know, again, we don't have a whole lot of time, people who are concerned about this, to provide additional information to the village council or to the staff in response to this economic analysis. So, you know, as citizens, how are we supposed to combat this evidence? Where do we get our information? Well, clearly we've been able to look on Zillow and other places and see there's a lot of empty condos right now for sale in Downers Grove. We have a condo complex that has been approved to the second half to be built. I've been told on the corner of Main and Maple, where there is a parking lot, that was supposed to be developed at one time, and it fell through. Village-owned property. Didn't happen. I mean, we have an individual from the towns calling us obstructionists. We're not. We're just concerned about our town. We love our village. We want it to be successful. We want people to come to the village, spend money, come to our shops, go to the Tivoli Theater. I mean, I think what Commissioner Barnett brought up is a really salient point. Yeah, we could have a 5-story office complex there. We wouldn't want that either, frankly. So doesn't it make sense to follow our comprehensive plan and change the zoning to downtown transition? Shouldn't it be downtown transition? You hear over and over people are concerned about the size and scope of this building. It's already been recommended to this village that it be downtown transition through a very long process that's our tax dollars paid for. Consultants coming and talking to our citizens, doing surveys. And the people of that area and the people of our town and many experts suggest this should be downtown transition. It shouldn't go back to the kind of zoning that was before that study. So I think we have a great opportunity here to look at this area, to zone it properly. I think this project has really highlighted the need to do this now before a lot of other development starts on Maple Avenue, to make this an area that fits our town, fits the nature of what we want as citizens, and also bring economic development to our village. So I think this is a great opportunity to look at that issue. I know it can come from staff, it can come from people from within the community, or it can come from village council to change that zoning area. I think that is what should happen. I think this project should be denied. There are safety issues. It does not meet the special use. It does not meet the comprehensive plan suggestions, which is part of this special use zoning ordinance. It says it very clearly. No special use may be recommended for approval or approved unless the respective review or decision-making body determines the proposed special use is consistent with and in substantial compliance with all village council policies and plans. It is not. This special use does not fall within all of our plans. And it is detrimental. I don't think we have evidence that shows that this is not detrimental to our village. I'm a little concerned that all the comments and signatures are not in the packet before you, or at least it wasn't provided to the public in the packet that was given out tonight. I think all that information should be made public to everybody in the village. Right now, we just have the November 3rd comments that Ken Lerner submitted. People should know when they download this information that there are a lot of people with great concerns about this project. Anybody just picking that up today would think there was one group in Downers Grove that opposes this. I think that that does a disservice to the press and also to the rest of the public looking at this issue. And I really do think we need some more information about this loading zone. I think that is of serious concern for pedestrians, people riding their bicycles, and then the people in the traffic zone of Maple Avenue. If this project needs to be larger to make sure that there is only loading in the back, then it is not appropriate for this place. It is not an appropriate use for this property to make it truly safe for everybody walking by and in the area. And so I hope that you will take all the information you've received, maybe give people more opportunity. The question about why hasn't anybody come up with any other ideas for this piece of property? My understanding is that if you call the real estate agent, they tell you they can't give you any information right now. You can't even go into the property to tour it. It is not available to anybody because it is under contract. The bank does not answer phone calls. So even if somebody was interested, and I believe some people have been interested in looking at the property and coming up with other ideas, I believe the Landmark Association has sent a letter to the village saying, we'll be happy to work with you on other ways to use this property in an economically viable way. Those offers have been made, and I think they can be explored and make a real difference in how this property proceeds and is good for our village. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dank. Thank you for your comments. Good evening.
Hello, thank you. My name is Dave Gaston. I live at 5320 Benton Avenue. I just want to comment on the desirability of this development. I believe that downtown Downers Grove is something really special, and I know that everybody in this room and in the community who's been there would agree. I believe that's a fact. And a lot of the comments that are made in the positive towards this development make it seem like it's going to be an asset to the downtown. And I would contend that it is the downtown that is the asset to this development. And as such, it would be nice to see some consideration in the development to acknowledge some of the concerns that the people in the surrounding community have about the size, whether or not this is going to offer any of the tax advantages that it contends that it will. And right now, I don't feel like the development does. I feel like the development has viewed the bulk regulations in the ordinance as a challenge that it's attempted to rise to and meet. And I wouldn't be opposed to this development if I felt like it was offering something to the village that is desired by a lot of these other people other than the single fact of trying to increase the density of the downtown population. As you may sense from this, I'm not in support of this development. And I'd just like to end with a comment based on a comment that the architect actually made at the last presentation in response to Commissioner Barnett's question about whether or not retail was considered on the first floor of the building. And the architect's response was, as it is now, Maple Avenue cannot support retail on the first floor. I tend to agree with that, but I want to suggest that as it is now, Maple Avenue cannot support a building of this size and scale on that particular site. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gaston. I know we have other questions or comments. Good evening. How are you tonight?
Good. My name is Tom Taylor. I've lived with my family in Downers Grove for only 35 years. I just wanted, I know I'm not directly addressing the variation in the ordinance, but the discussion of the Edwards home and the proposed alteration of the property we're now in has led me to Google. And I have looked up all sorts of very fascinating topics, such as sustainable architecture, affordable architecture, adaptable architecture, and flexible architecture. And if you look up some of those topics, you find established designers and architects and young emerging designers coming up with some very exciting imagery and environments for us to live in. And I'm afraid that much of what's gone on in Downers Grove is pretty uninspired. We have a lot of big boxy apartment buildings. Just recently on the evening news, I saw a piece about an architect and designer in Georgia who projected lasers on the surface of a building, and incredible things were happening. I'm not saying we're going to project lasers and lights on our buildings, but maybe we should. I don't want to take up your time, but with a name like Downers, you have to be good.
Can we have that trademarked somewhere?
I've already got the copyright. And it's for sale like everything else. We have lost much of the Grove, but thanks to people that are in this audience, Lyman Woods was saved. So once again, I encourage an expanded conversation, and I hope we don't rush into hasty decisions that will perhaps not serve our community as well as others might. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello. My name is Christine Martin, and I live at 701 Maple Avenue. I would like to start with a quote from William Murdoch's book, Keeping Time, The History and Theory of Preservation in America. In his book, he says, "It has been said that, at best, preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over mutual concern for the future. That is what we are all doing here tonight, expressing our concern for the future developments in Downers Grove and how they should potentially contribute to our city. There is now a very significant number of Downers Grove residents that have clearly expressed their concern with the construction of the Marquis on Maple condominium development. The two main concerns have been, first, saving a historically significant home at 942 Maple, and even a greater concern for the proposed monstrosity that would replace it. Repeatedly, you have heard us state our concerns, so I take my final opportunity at this meeting to be heard. The Marquis on Maple does not contribute to Downers Grove. If local real estate agents found condos here a breeze to sell, or if there is not a surplus of condos already, or half-constructed condos, and there is indeed a call for more, then there would be a legitimate case for the condominiums. At the last council meeting, Mr. Sosin was asked by a council member why no retail stores would be part of their building. He answered because they, the businesses, couldn't be sustained by the condo residents and would not prosper in the building. So if businesses, maybe like a dry cleaner or a cafe, within the condo couldn't make a profit, how does he propose that future residents will contribute to local stores on Main Street? Downers Grove is known for its charm, especially the downtown area, and in the neighborhoods surrounding it. The developers of the Marquis are exploiting that charm at the cost of adding no significant contributions. With numerous other places to build in Downers Grove, why Maple? Why? Because it's lovely, it's old world. I find it technically an education in architecture for my children, but that is why they want it. That is why they want it. They want to use it because maybe Maple Avenue will sell their condos. Maybe, and maybe not. I understand that progress is usually good, that communities strive to grow and flourish. Nonetheless, though, Downers Grove is already a big city, and it sprawls far and wide, and this one condo will not make a financial gain for the city. So I ask you to please leave this especially beautiful thoroughfare alone. I would like to close with Maple Avenue is one of the last true treasures of the city, and that historic preservation is eternally optimistic. It is an inspiring field intent on improving present and future quality of life through the appreciation of our built and cultural heritage. Historic preservation is architectural history, community planning, historical research and surveys, oral history, economic revitalization, and so much more. Quality of life, a sense of place, a pride of place is all connected to historical preservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? Good evening.
Good evening, Karen Crowe, 5408 Fairmount Avenue, 3 blocks that way. I'm just so proud of everyone who's spoken here today. I don't have anything that I can add that would be an improvement on anything you said. You've brought facts, you've brought inspiration, you've brought loyalty to the town and to your neighbors, and they've done this all in the extra hours that we have in the evening to be Googling and to be calling and to be emailing. We haven't had professionals working full-time on this for months, being paid lots of money. We've done this because we want this community to be vibrant, like you all do, and we have a vested interest in the beauty of what exists now, unlike some of the people who don't live around here that will live through the repercussions of this. And I just want to thank everyone who's brought so much information to this that I think is more trustworthy than what the petitioners have brought forth. And that's an opinion. However, give us another couple of months, give us some professionals to work on this, and we can present to you something that will be way more convincing than what you've heard from the petitioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crowe. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Tom Nybo Sr., 5253 Blodgett. I've been listening to what's going on, and Christine came up with a quote, and I just thought of another quote from a song by Joni Mitchell. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. In this case, they put up a condo. All I hear the representative of the mystery developer dangling in front of us dollar signs. Is that all we care about? Don't we care about our environment? Don't we care about Downers Grove? It seems like that's all they have to offer is dollar signs. And I think Downers Grove needs something more than that. And I would recommend that you deny anything on Maple Avenue that is like this monstrosity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nybo. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, my name's Terry Williams, and I live at 5230 Blodgett, just a couple of blocks south of Maple, across the street from Whittier School. A lot of good points have been brought up this evening. The increase in traffic, safety issues. No one's mentioned stormwater, replacing 2 buildings with one massive building is going to change the water displacement in that area. But I think that the most important issue is to look at the vision and the feel of our village. Whether it's officially a historic area or not, it is a historic downtown, it's a historic neighborhood, and it has a lot of qualities that can't be replaced by financial gain. The village has in the past been driven on many occasions by financial gain, and they've been misplaced. They've had We have a history of poor zoning for residential design. We have a history of poor land use for water displacement. And we often find ourselves behind the ball, trying to catch up, but once you've done the damage, it's hard to go back and undo it. You know, you can't, if you let somebody build something that brings in a few more dollars for taxes, which is a wonderful thing, but is ugly and doesn't fit in the neighborhood, then it takes a monsoon of effort to undo the damage that you've already been, that's already been done. So I guess I would suggest that even though that's a lot of money to bring in property tax, it's probably in the long run not worth it to the village. The amount of atmosphere and neighborhood cohesiveness that would be lost by allowing a development of this type in that neighborhood on that spot. As has been mentioned before, if you start in that part of Maple, how far are you going to go down? Are you going to go down to Fairview? I mean, there's a lot of smaller properties that may come up for sale in the next 5 or 10 years. Is it going to become one big square condominium development? If it is, I think that would be, might bring us a lot of money for a very short period of time before it completely destroyed the atmosphere of the downtown and the historic nature of the neighborhood. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here, and thanks for your comments. Good evening, Mrs. Nybo.
Hello. You get to see all of us tonight. My name is Kathy Nybo. I live at 5253 Blodgett, fortunately for over 40 years. I wanted to mention that when I looked at the revised information that was presented from the builder, he didn't respond to the fact or make any changes on a safety issue that I was concerned about before. And one of the criteria about the special permit is that it must be safe. And I pointed out there are 3 sides that the fire department cannot access because the porte-cochere is too low. They said only ambulances could get to the back. And I'm thinking, the people, what would they do without, ladders, the buckets when they need them? And 3 sides. They said staging will be in the front. And when I mentioned that last time, Mr. Solson responded and said that the building is fireproof and it's not going to be a problem, basically, because it's fireproof. Well, they said the Titanic wouldn't sink either. They said it was unsinkable. I don't think anyone can make a statement that it will never have a fire. I'd say what they're doing with the fire systems there are probably going to make it unlikely. But if there is one, we have a lot of really good, expensive equipment in our fire department, and I'd like them to be accessible to the residents in that building. And it just seems very unsafe. And then I have to compare this a little bit on a lighter note. My husband loves Gunsmoke, which is kind of weird, and now that we're retired, he watches a lot of episodes. So occasionally drives me crazy. But there's a storyline that I saw in Gunsmoke that reminded me of this, and it's happened. There's several episodes. When the medicine man comes in town and he's got his wagon, and he comes selling with all his fancy terms. He's telling this is the best thing. This elixir is going to change your life. You're going to feel better. You're going to love it. You're going to need it. You're going to want it. And the line forms. Everybody gets, oh, I want some of that stuff too. But then they disappear, and they're gone. And when everybody finds out that all the promises that the medicine man made didn't happen that way, and they're stuck. And that's what we're going to be, how do we find out if it doesn't work? After it's built? And then we go, wow, I think we made a mistake. I mean, that's just amazing. So last time, Mr. Solson described that the building was going to be a beautiful shade of gray. Excuse me, but I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think of my favorite crayon on the box was never gray. So They're going to tell us these things. They're going to overestimate the income that's going to be generated, and they're going to underestimate other things like the traffic. I went to the tours this weekend, and there was discussion about the plan that might be happening here, and there might be different buildings in this village hall space. And they're talking about maybe up to 200 condos. We're going to add 200 maybe? When they say there was in there a 2020 traffic estimate of how many cars we're going to, with this one at 55 units, how much traffic are we going to have there with 200 of them? And how can you estimate something that's going to happen in 2020? Geez. But knowing that we have a lot of unknowns and additional buildings being talked about, that just is another concern for me. Condos are just kind of glorified apartments. Why not townhouses? The Georgian courts over on Gilbert are very nice, and they fit really nicely into the neighborhood. So it just seems that's the only thing that everybody here wants to make. We didn't have a price on those units until just recently with the new information. And it says the 3-bedroom units are going to be $475,000, and the 2 bedrooms are going to be $375,000. Why would anybody spend nearly $500,000 to live in a condo that overlooks a parking lot and a parking deck roof? If you had almost $1 million, I think I would like a room with a view. I don't know about you, and that's not the view I would pick. So who are they appealing to? If we have units that we're not selling in the condos that we have now, how do they think that if there's more expensive ones, they're going to sell more of them? And, there was one thing I was going to say to Mr. Barnett about safety. You mentioned the sidewalks along there, the way it was laid out. And I think about Maple Avenue is a busy thoroughfare that will be one of the first streets that will be cleaned when it snows. And when it snows, you get those big mounds from the snow plows. It's going to be very difficult for people to maneuver there when they want to try to keep the deck, the loading thing there. The snow is going to be hard if you're trying to push something or if you're just trying to walk. I don't know. I'm concerned how they would maintain that. Of course, they're going to say they're going to do everything and it's going to be perfect because that's what they do. But we'll find that out later, and then we're stuck with it. I really think that was an interesting comment when you made last time. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Popovich a question or two questions. Do you live in Downers Grove?
I'm not sure. I don't know if that's really pertinent to the...
Well, it is to me because everyone here, almost everyone, we live here. We live in Downers Grove. And this man makes decisions that he recommends to you. I think the residents should have a say. Like, for instance, there's been a lot of emails. There's been emails and different people, they told me that they had left messages and things. Can someone tell us, what was the percentage? Was it mostly for, against?
I'm sorry.
Like the people that are writing, are they for the condo to go up, or are they against it? Just to get an idea that I really think most people are for you, would like you to deny, and I think it's a small handful because that are for it. Because Mr. Sosin said 49,000 residents were in favor of his project a couple meetings ago. And I thought, what did he count? Every mother, daughter, son, dog? I mean, 49,000 people are not, they're not all for the project, not 49. And I wondered how he came up with that number. Did he take a poll? Who did he talk to? And he said there was only 20 people that were for not having a condo, and there was just 20 of us. That's what he said, which I thought was silly. So I just wondered if it was, did you get a good response? Are there a lot of people responding, or are you not allowed to say? Did you get, was it 50-50? Was it close?
Well, I can answer that question. I think there's been 700 people have signed a petition that have submitted to us. There's probably been several dozen emails independent of that. There have been, I don't know what everyone has got.
Most of them are negative. Most of them are opposed. That's just like the conversation here.
But most of them say, save 942 Maple. I don't want the condo building.
Well, there are two issues.
Yeah, right.
Right.
I understand.
We haven't sorted them out as to which ones actually talk about the special use and which one just want to save the Edwards home.
Well, I just wanted to say, I hope that you will listen to the people that live in Downers Grove. We're the residents. The people that are going to build this project, they're leaving. As soon as they're done, they're gone. They're out of state. But we'll be here for a lot longer, so please consider things that have been said tonight. Thank you.
We absolutely will, and just as a clarification, the Village of Downers Grove does not have a residency requirement for anyone other than Mr. Fieldman. So it is not uncommon for many of our employees not to live in Downers Grove, but that doesn't mean that they're any less passionate about performing their duties to the highest and best standard. Clearly, we know who the constituents are. There's a diagram of the village government. I'm going to get off track here for a second because it's about time we did that. We were talking about crayon colors.
Well, then you need Mr. Good.
And I had to look up, I think it was Professor Bone was the medicine man that you were talking about in that episode of Gunsmoke, if I'm correct. But there's an org chart for the Village of Downers Grove, and it has the staff and the village council, but then there's a box that's above everybody. And in that box, it says the residents of Downers Grove. So everyone's very mindful of that org chart. Appreciate those comments. Other questions or comments from members of the audience? And we haven't forgotten about you, Dr. Goodman. We'll allow you to challenge, we'll allow you to channel Mr. Cavallo. I hope not.
Yeah, please.
Well, this has been much, much better than TV tonight, I will have to tell you.
Not better than Gunsmoke, come on.
No, this is way better than Gunsmoke, because this is Gunsmoke. This is Downers Grove. This is, my name's Michelle Solinsky. I've been a resident of Downers Grove now for about 25 years. Raised my family here. We actually chose to live here rather than a few of the other towns in the area because of its diversity. And I've just become to love this town and its people. And I've kind of watched from afar because guess what, folks? I'm from Indiana. So this kind of strikes home a little bit. But mostly I just want to add that I think that the fact that we have to do this special use permit thing is like a blessing because it kind of puts the brakes on this whole building thing, and it did open some eyes. So in some ways, this building is speaking to us and saying, hey, look over here at what's going on, what's happening to Downers Grove. With this committee, the way you have it set up, and all the rules and regulations that you have in place for building, it's true. There are a handful of people that are going to make the decision on the looks of that corner, probably for the rest of our lives. So that's a big decision. I hope that by listening to the residents, the taxpayers, the voters that have come forward today, that would weigh much heavier than, like a lot of the people said today, some documents that spoke in this particular direction that were bought and paid for. And, you know, of course, there's some business members that are going to be unhappy if this thing doesn't go through. I believe a lot hinges on this special use, one way or the other. But it's like my father always said, if it's a good deal today, it's going to be a good deal tomorrow. So I think basically what you've got going here, besides of the fact that you have a lot of warm-hearted, very sentimental residents, that they poked a few holes in your studies and your facts. And I think you need to take a look at that. I think that the first thing I heard when I sat down was about money. And I hope that this isn't, I mean, we have to step back and put the money aside and think about the future of this community. I hope that the visions of Sugar Plums are interrupted now, and that you can take a sincere look at what's going on here. I think that, yes, there's a special use hearing, that's what we have now, but really, what's happening here is the community is asking for time and consideration. We need time and consideration, because it's not a vested business interest. It's a wholehearted plea to the people that we put into office here, into this committee. It's a wholehearted plea to say, hey, whoa, what's going on here? Let's take a real look at what's happening here. Put aside the dollars, listen to the people. The people have spoken. So my question to you is, what happens now?
What happens now?
What happens
is
now?
There will be
Literally.
probably another 6 or 7 people who will speak after you.
Okay, I mean after this
We'll ask
meeting.
some questions.
I mean after the meeting. What is the process?
The process is that this ordinarily would be on the agenda to be voted on a week from today
Voted on by the members that are
by the
seated here?
village council. The buck
By
stops
the
here.
bill? I understand that. I understand it. Okay, well, I just want to say I wouldn't want to be in your shoes, because I think you have a hard decision to make. But as far as these responses to the issues, it is a special use. It can be denied. But I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg here. That after hearing the pleas of the people that live on this street and the people closest to the impact, that this whole thing needs to be reconsidered as to what to do with that property. And of course, that's my opinion, but I thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Zelinski. Other questions or comments? Good evening. Congratulations, Mr. LeCran. You are the 20th speaker.
Thank you.
What does he win?
We'll get thrown darts if we can have one more.
Smoke.
Tom LeCran, 545 Chicago Avenue. Before the residents get their hopes up because of emotional issues or whatever, as I understand the process in which the mayor described earlier on, is this development has to meet all of the requirements for a special use, whatever all those are. Is it possible for the public to enumerate just exactly what those criteria are? For example, traffic study was done. They say it's going to be minimal. What if it was maximum? Is that a reason to deny it by law and by our position in the village council policies and things?
Sure. I'll be happy to read again the approval criteria, which is found in section 12.05.
Right, I read that, but that doesn't get, that says all others, and you could have a whole bunch.
Well, hold on a second, please. No special use may be recommended for approval or approved unless the respective review or decision-making body determines that the proposed special use is consistent with and in substantial compliance with all village council policies and plans, and that the applicant has presented evidence to support each of the following conclusions. First, that the proposed use is expressly authorized as a special use in the district in which it is to be located. Well, that's pretty non-controversial because it is. Second, that the proposed use at the proposed location is necessary or desirable to provide a service or a facility that is in the interest of public convenience and will contribute to the general welfare of a neighborhood or community. Now, what factors go into that obviously can be a myriad of things. And third, and last, that the proposed use will not, in the particular case, be detrimental to the health, safety, or general welfare of persons residing or working in the vicinity, or be injurious to property values or improvements in the vicinity. So that's where things like traffic studies, what have you, come into play.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then, just as I think I mentioned last time, there's another section that bears upon this, and that is section 12.050G, which usually comes up in these contexts, because that provision says that, it's G3, actually, that says that the village council is authorized to impose such conditions and restrictions upon the premises benefited by a special use as the council determines to be necessary to ensure compliance with the standards of section 12.050H, which I just read, to reduce or minimize the effect of the special use upon other properties in the area and to better carry out the general public and intent of this zoning ordinance. So those, simply put, are the words that we're working within. That's the analysis box, if you will. So with that commercial break, are there other questions and comments from the audience on this proposal? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Amy Gasson. I live at 5320 Benton Avenue. I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear that I do not support this development either. I agree with most of what's been said here tonight. I just want to mention that I teach an architectural history course, and along with a lot of discussion, obviously, about historic preservation and preserving older buildings, we also talk about new buildings and context when we're designing new buildings, considering the surrounding buildings and neighborhood when we're designing buildings. I don't think anyone can deny that this development does not fit in with the surrounding buildings in the neighborhood because of its mass, its scale, and the materials used, and therefore it is not desirable. I believe it was noted earlier that if this development was a commercial building or an office building, it would not even have to go through this special use process. And in my head, I thought, well, thank goodness that we have to go through this. Thank goodness it's a residential building, because this then allows you to deny the construction. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Before we ask for the spirit of Jim Cavallo to speak, are there any other questions or comments from the audience? And then obviously the petitioner gets an opportunity as well. Dr. Goodman, you want to reprise your best impersonation of Jim Cavallo?
Well, thank you, Mayor. I'm Stu Gordon Goodman, 5834 Midaw. But before I go into Mr. Cavallo's statement, there were three questions that came to my mind as I listened to the presentations, and I'd like to pose those to you and see if we can get some answers. The first question is related to Hillary Denk's mentioning the landmark preservations letter to you, in which they are suggesting that they would be glad to work with you, village staff, and the developer to find a solution that's different from this one. I was hoping you would put that letter to you and the village, members of the village board into the record of this meeting. Landmarks Preservation is requesting a deferral on the proposed residential condominium development, and so that the village staff may have more time to work with the developer and Landmarks Preservation, Landmarks Illinois it's called now, to find a design solution that incorporates the historic Edwards House. While the project has been recommended for approval by your plan commission, we believe that not all options have been explored. And then it goes on to more detail. But please put that letter into the public record so that people outside of the council will also be able to view that.
I think I asked for that exactly to be done last week.
It is, actually. If you click on council responses on the website, on the page with the agenda, it's there with some other information.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
So it isn't in the main part of the packet, but it's in something called council responses on the village website. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, that's quite customary. Typically, when there's an agenda item that is put out on the customary Friday before the Tuesday meeting, and there are questions, comments, requests from members of the council. The response to those questions, comments, or in this case, a request from myself to make it part of the record, are included in a subsequent collection of materials that we call council responses, because typically it's a response to questions, but it can also include additional information or even outside information. It will then go with the agenda for that particular discussion in the archives, if you will, of the village going forward. So typically, anyone wanting to see the latest and greatest information on any topic will first check the agenda that's available on Friday, and the council response is typically available following Monday, sometimes even Tuesday, depending on the depth and breadth of the information involved.
Has there been any communication between the staff and Landmarks Illinois about this issue?
I'm not that I'm aware of, although there's a key component to, probably the most key component to that being pursued, and that would be the owners of the property.
Yes, I'm sure they should be involved
Right,
too.
we can't redesign the proposal for a petition, bless you. Certainly if, I'm just speaking for myself, and certainly if the petitioner said yes, we think that's a brilliant idea, we'd like to work with an outside agency in the village to scrap this proposal and do a homeowner one, we certainly would consider it.
The other component of the request, besides the working with the developer and Landmarks Illinois, is deferral. And it's my recollection, I haven't read the most recent version of the zoning ordinance as closely as I had the previous ones, but there were some timelines in previous ordinances. Certain actions, when they're recommended by the Plan Commission, had to be at least taken up by the village council within a certain time, and I think others had to actually have a decision by the village council within a certain time. I wondered, do any of those sort of timelines apply to this special use request?
It's a fair question. I think we've all sort of asked that question earlier. There are some time limits that any petitioner before us can expect that we will try to respect, and in fact have to respect. I don't recall where we're at in that timeline.
Yes, 45 days from the hearing at the Plan Commission.
45 days from the Plan Commission hearing.
November 3rd.
If that was the Plan Commission meeting, I think that's right.
So what does that correspond to in calendar time?
We can calculate that.
December 18th.
Okay.
That's what happens when you update a zoning ordinance. It goes from 45 days to 90 days, says the attorney and Mr. Popovich just informed me. So we'll actually look up the
3 months.
Code section here, and we'll post it up here.
Yeah, that would be helpful to have that number available to us as we think about this.
I think that would be useful to everyone involved. I agree.
And the other thing that I thought would be very useful to have available to us is a staff analysis or an outside independent experts analysis of the economic study, which was disclosed to us on Friday. We've already presented some evidence that there are some inconsistencies or typos or some problems, one might say, with the first reading of that. And so I think that was a point that other people had made, that we don't have the sort of expertise to be able to do that, but I believe your staff and your consultants would. I don't think you should take that economic study at face value. I think you should look into and get an independent assessment of it, whether it's from your staff or from another economic consultant. And that's my request, that you do so. Let's see. Yes, that covers the questions that came up as I was listening to other people give their evidence. Now I want to turn to a statement prepared by Mr. Jim Cavallo, and I did put that into PowerPoint form so that we can look at it together. Mr. Cavallo is a PhD in economics. His focus was on environmental economics and policy, and he has been practicing as a head of his own company now after doing some research work at Argonne. His company is now primarily working on the energy efficiency of existing buildings. But his remarks, yes, I guess, I remember now that I can use this to go on. His remarks deal with the availability and the marketability of condominiums in this area. And in particular, he did some studies of the using did I not copy that? His studies were based on the Caldwell Banker and the
That's the last bullet of the last page.
oh, okay. Well, let's go to the last page then. I've got things reversed.
right there. It's in the summary.
Right. He used the Freddie Mac and Caldwell Banker reports on current market conditions for multifamily buildings in general and the condos in particular in the western suburbs. And as a result, he's skeptical about the statements made in the Strategy Planning Associates report. In particular, he believes that any 2- and 3-bedroom condos in Downers Grove will probably have great difficulty in maintaining a price point close to $400,000. And that's the sort of thing that your independent analysis could examine. But going back to how he arrived at that conclusion, it's that he's seeing that although these multifamily building starts are growing again in this area, the starts of multifamily are not growing as fast as single families. And single-family housing is up too. And that although unemployment is falling, wages are not growing as fast, and as such, it's difficult to finance a home, more difficult now than it was prior to 2008. And as a result, the demand for housing continues to be sluggish by historic standards, and we keep hearing that on the news daily. So there are 2 points about the vacancy rate in Chicago area. Condominiums particularly are high vacancy rates. We know the vacancy rates in Downers Grove, you've received evidence about that previously. But it's lower in the western suburbs. On the other hand, the competition with single-family homes in the suburbs is stronger and more direct as an alternative to buying a condominium. So, as it has been pointed out, this $400,000 price range that these condominiums are going to be marketed at has to compete with the desirability of single-family detached homes, which are becoming increasingly available. And for young families or anyone who is able to make a choice, this is a direct comparison. And his conclusion then is because these new home starts have been growing fast in the past 2 years in our environment, it's going to be very hard to keep this price range and fill those units. So I really think that this kind of testimony reinforces the need for you to have that independent analysis of the economic report you've been provided and not accepted on face value. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will obviously receive Mr. Cavallo's statement for the record. There have been others who couldn't be here tonight who have submitted statements electronically. Those will be made part of the record as well. Thank you, Dr. Goodman. Other questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to the proposed special use petition? Good evening.
Hi, I'm Joe Potts. I live at 216 Lincoln. I don't live in the area in question, but I just have a few opinions. From some of the comments I've heard, people tend to take the information, and some people interpret things differently from what is presented. I know it's a very emotional issue. There's two issues. One is save the house. The other issue is we don't want condos. I just am asking that everyone be respectful of everyone involved in the decision-making. There have been some impolite comments made. For example, as to the architect from Georgia, I'm sure every architect in Downers Grove does not just design buildings in Downers Grove or Illinois. The developer is not the big bad wolf here. There was a property for sale. They went through the process, and it's been a long process. Everyone needs to do their homework. This has been going on for a long time. You can go on the village website. You can come to the meetings. If you can't come to a meeting, you can watch it on YouTube. You can see every second of the decision-making process. So I would just hope that everyone stick to the facts. And I know it's emotional, but you also have to consider the rights of the property owners and the seller. And you can't do the Monday morning quarterback thing and have a developer come and go through all the hoops, do everything they're supposed to do, and then suggest we have to put this off till we change the zoning laws back to not allow it. In conclusion, everybody just be respectful and stick to the facts.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Do we have a 24th speaker? But no one's, I'm not counting. And of course, we're always available to receive comments by telephone, by email, in person, plenty of opportunities. Well, thank you. I want to, of course, allow the petitioner, counsel for the petitioner to make any comments. Welcome back.
Thank you. It would be helpful after probably 10 hours of discussion about this between the Plan Commission and 2 meetings before the board to kind of summarize how we got here. This property has been zoned commercial for 49 years, and not a lot has happened with it during those 49 years. Around 10 years ago, the village erected a parking garage behind this building to stimulate some development in that area. And I think some has occurred, but perhaps not as much as the village envisioned, to feed and to sustain the businesses along Main and all through there. The village then undertook, for a substantial amount of money, a plan. And that plan called for a downtown area, and with vibrancy and mixed use, and we looked at that plan before we started. So I think from the village's point of view, then it still wasn't working, and my understanding is the village then set up this downtown zoning district, which is what we looked at when we thought what is appropriate for this property. In the meantime, there's the property and the property owner. There are 2 buildings on there. They are both One was a failed office building. The other one, frankly, I think it's just a house, but it's empty and it is in total disrepair. Even to move the Edwards house would take a substantial amount of money, but also a substantial expense once it's moved. So we have, this property was in foreclosure. It's been for sale by a bank in Indiana, and we believe they have certain rights, and we looked at it. Some comments were made about our architect, and I think I can take either credit or blame for the architect. I'm familiar with them, and no developer would just talk to an architect and hire the first architect they find. We had numerous people that looked at this property, and we looked at their vision and what their ideas were. And the reason we picked this architect is we felt his vision was the closest to the downtown plan. And as it's turned out, he's given us a plan without one variation, without one departure from the design criteria. Now, we understand that our neighbors may not like that criteria or that plan. Frankly, there are things about it we didn't like also, but we adhered to it because essentially that's the plan of the village. Once we had an architect, the first thing that we did was have a meeting as required and as is appropriate with your staff. And it wasn't your village planner, it was your entire staff. And the fire people looked at it, and the engineers looked at it, and the public works people looked at it from the point of view of safety, and from a point of view of stormwater management, from the point of view of design. And they sent our architect back with numerous comments and numerous changes to the plan, and that's the plan you're looking at today. So when I hear people, and I know everybody's speaking in good faith, say that we just hired an architect from out of state, and he came in and he gave us this terrible plan, and we kind of like the plan, actually. We like it a lot, and we think it's going to work. That plan had the input of a lot of people, but at no point was safety or stormwater management or traffic or any of these other issues ignored. Every one of them was covered over and over again. Then we commenced to do the studies, and we haven't seen any other studies. Our traffic people are the same people that did Good Samaritan Hospital, and you know, I think, the quality of the work they did. They didn't just do that plan on one day. They did it twice, which is kind of unusual because there's such a wide variation being across from the school and on Saturday in Downers Grove. And what that traffic study showed was that traffic is heavy in Downers Grove at certain times. It's downtown. But they also found that we were not significantly negatively impacted. Will we have an impact? Sure. Anytime you build something and replace two empty structures, you are going to have some impact on it. So when we look at some of the comments, I know they're well-intended, but I've been involved in this project right from the beginning, from the first meeting. And when I hear some of the comments that are made that we didn't care about any of these things, every one of it is important. You have one of the most well-respected, large staff in Cook County, especially in suburban Cook County. And I'm sorry, in Cook, well, in the whole metropolitan area. And Cook County is part of it, and certainly DuPage. And there are many changes that they made, and those changes show in that plan. And one example, this loading zone, that was a thought that was given at the end. It's not an integral part of our plan, and frankly, it wasn't even done or considered when we did our traffic study because it was a later suggestion, and we've given two alternate plans, but we're not married to either one of them, as I mentioned last time. The question, there's a vision for Maple, and the district has a beginning and an end like every other district. And we understand that many of these neighbors come from 3-4 blocks away, 2 blocks away along Maple. It's a different district. We're on the edge of the downtown district, and that is a residential district. And we're adhering to the district and to the criteria and to the design criteria for the district that we're in with the influence. And one of the people got up and said that this is out of context. It's not the context of what's 3 blocks east of there. We respect that, and we wouldn't even be here today if we were trying to build that building there. We're building it behind a parking garage. The turrets of it on the ends are much higher than our building. The main part is slightly less, but the whole bulk of that building has a significant influence on this property, and we're not coming in to do anything but condominiums. There are other things, many things that are permitted under your downtown plan, and the bulk of it could be the same. We think condos are an appropriate use, and your code says it is. Finally, there was a comment about there was no need for condos, and we've heard that over and over again. There's no developer that would spend the kind of money that we will have to build this building without first doing a study. That's not something that goes into the material that we're giving you today, because frankly, it's proprietary. If we didn't think we could build this building, if we didn't think there was a need for it, if we didn't think we could sell it for what we've projected the sale prices based on the quality of these units, we would not be here tonight, because all the risk is on the developer. We're not asking for anything from Village. We're not asking for a variation. We're not asking for a break. We're not asking for any proceeds from your development area. None of that. We're on our own, and it's our risk, and we're prepared to proceed. To say that this plan doesn't fit the criteria, when this board legislatively established the criteria of the downtown plan, and we've been able to adhere to it in every aspect, is just contradictory. The reason it's a special use is to make sure we adhere to the criteria, not to go out and say we'd like to keep that house or do this or do that. Somebody mentioned townhouses. You know, I don't even know if they fit in this district. There are many things that don't, and there are things that do. The point that I'm trying to make is that we have made this fit in consultation with your staff based on your design criteria and your vision and the vibrancy that you're looking for in the downtown area, and I don't think we can be penalized for that. It's the same thing we presented to the Plan Commission, and they took more time, maybe not total, these 2 meetings, but a lot of time on this project, heard from everybody. The comment I made that 49,000 people are in favor of this is not true. It's nonsense. We don't know. What we know is there are 49,000 people in this village, 49,175 the last time I looked. And all those people have a stake in this plan. They all paid for it. They all benefit from the tax money. They all benefit from the vibrancy of a downtown area. And I'm confident that this board would take into account your plan and all those people. And I'm sorry that we can't satisfy 20 of our neighbors. Actually, there are a lot more than 20 of our neighbors, but I'm sorry about that. But we think that we presented the right plan for this. We're gratified that the business district letter supports it, the Plan Commission supports it, and your staff supports it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to the Village Council for any other questions or comments. Commissioner Barnett?
Just got a few questions, Mayor. I don't need answers this evening, but a couple of things I'd like to just get follow-up on over the next few days. For my own recollection, did KLOA do Whittier, Randall, and Lester neighborhoods? That's one thing. I think it's a reasonable thing to float the economic impact survey past our EDC, just ask if they have any commentary on it. I think that's a thing we ought to go through the exercise of doing. I'm not sure the village has a lot of folks that are employed as well as volunteer that make up their infrastructure of people that evaluate these things, whether it's the people on the Plan Commission or EDC. We do leverage those expertises and try not to operate from a position of opinion in most instances. So it's reasonable to get some additional input, sort of a third-party check, but an EDC group is made up of Downers Grove residents who have no axe to grind and no profit to make, in any kind of review like that. And a couple other notes here. It was suggested earlier, and I guess I'd just like some sort of a legal opinion, not this evening necessarily, but it doesn't strike me as reasonable, but I'd like to know the legal impact of the idea of change in zoning midstream, so to speak. That was suggested as maybe a course. My gut reaction is that would just flat be wrong. Whether it solved the problem or not, it would be a wrong kind of an activity, and one I can't imagine being a good idea, but I would like a official legal commentary on that. The idea of, does this diminish property values? I understand some residents don't like the idea of out-of-town anecdotal evidence, so that's fair. I'd like to get some kind of reaction, and maybe there's others that we could engage beyond our staff locally for some input, but we have some experience here. We have, 40 years or so. We have the Grove apartment condos that went up over on Grove Street. We have Morningside. We have Station Crossing. All of those immediately adjacent, new buildings, similar size and scope, immediately adjacent to residential parcels. And so I'd be curious to see if we felt for some reason there was evidence that property values adjacent to those were somehow suffered negatively. We think we got input from the outside, suggest otherwise, but that's some real home experience, and it'd be cool if we could learn something there. What else do I have? Then the last thing, just for everybody, Mrs. Potts made a commentary at the end that was helpful, I think, to try and keep everybody reacting right. And before we get too far down the road of evidence presented or ugly or whatever sort of opinion might be out there, everybody should remember that this group of people up here are residents with no skin in this game but for the fact we all live here and pay taxes here and have to live with it. In fact, two of us happen to be probably closer to this development than most of the folks in the audience, and probably almost certainly closer than 600 or so of those signatories. We're not going to take any of this stuff lightly, and nor are we in this decision-making process from afar, if you will. So I'd encourage everybody to remain a little bit focused on some of that, because it does matter. If we were, all of us from some faraway place or employed or some other context like that, it would be reasonable to question the process. It's just not, and it's very much on purpose. So please do, everybody keep that in mind. Greg alluded to it earlier, as did the mayor. Everybody up here is working hard to try and find a solution here that does some balancing and respects a lot of different angles, and I just hope everybody is able to keep that in mind. So, it's there.
Thanks, Commissioner. Other questions from the council, comments?
I just have one quick comment, along with the resident that spoke earlier, thanking everyone for their commentary. I'll add to that too, and I do thank everyone for coming tonight and previous meetings, and the petitioner as well. This is a big decision for our community. It does lay foundation for a long future in this area of town. But it is up to us to make these decisions, and we do have criteria to look at and follow. Every bit of information is helpful, every comment, every point of view, every perspective, whether it's a neighbor or an online petition, signer from Alaska. They're all very important, and they add to the record. The one question I guess I'll have for staff, and because it's been brought up a few times now about safety, I was trying to find in here about fire apparatus and response. Normally we don't get too operational with these questions, but because our residents have asked, can we just get a quick overview of an operational scenario of, say, a balcony rescue from the top story on the west side? How would we attempt something like that? So we can let our residents know that we have actions and plans in place for all sorts of different emergency responses. The building being fire sprinklered is a huge benefit for our community, and that is part of our code that they have to fulfill that. So I think that's something that we can consider here as a positive. I look forward to, hearing more from my colleagues and others before we vote on this, hopefully next week. I would like to keep this petition moving forward so we can get to an end point before the end of this year. I think that's within our wheelhouse and responsible and respectable for all the parties involved. Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Rankin.
I just had a few questions and just kind of general statements. There was a lot of good input from our citizens, and we're really glad that you're a part of the process. But I always want to make sure that I guess all the statements that are made, that if they're inaccurate, that we just make sure that it's correct, because we should all know the exact same information. So one of our residents said something, and I don't have the comprehensive plan memorized, I'm working on it, but they had said that this section, the comp plan says that this section was recommended to be downtown transition. I don't recall that in the comp plan, so I would like to know if that's a true fact or not. Okay, and then the other thing I was thinking about was, we've heard a lot of information about traffic impacts, and Mr. Sasson and his team did a traffic study. Now, Maple Avenue is considered a collector street. So can we also know what's the traffic capacity of a collector street? And where would this fall, that 1% increase in its capacity? Because I think that's important to understand. If we're talking about it's going to increase traffic, yes, it's going to increase traffic, but is it at capacity at this point or not? I think that's an important thing for us all to understand. So we heard from Mr. Sasson too that the loading zone is an option that we could ask. There was some concern about safety, but that could be something that's not set in stone, right? Let's see. I think the other thing of interest is we work, my family business is in construction. So there was comments about the workers wouldn't be from Downers Grove, and I think it would probably behoove the developer to not hire tradespeople from other parts of the country, even though the architect is from Georgia. They would be hiring people in our area to do this work, and it would create jobs in our area. I don't think that's something that is not, I think that's the opinion, that statement. What's my other question? Is the economic impact info that they provided to us, that's not something we're considering in the standards of approval anyways, right? It's more informational because we asked for that information.
I think we asked for that information.
Yes.
I asked.
Commissioner Durkin asked for that specifically, that's why it was provided.
Correct, and it was directly in light of the fact that I had inquired if the lack of first floor retail, and they came back with the information.
So it's not as something we would require any other developer to do to get approval for a special use?
That's correct. It is not listed on the submittal requirements, but we do try to respond to requests from the council on requests for information.
And to be honest, I'm rather surprised we got it, because I know there's a significant cost associated with getting this kind of data.
Okay.
I apologize for the typos, but it was done in a very short time to accommodate the schedule, and I caught most of them. A little proofreading, but I missed a couple.
Understood.
I think that was all at this point. I just wanted to kind of make sure some of those things were clear.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you.
I do have one general question, and I don't know if you'd be willing to respond to it or not. I understand if you say no. There's a lot of discussion about market saturation, not being able to obtain the dollar amount that you're looking to get for the sale of these units. What is your plan on selling them? Are you looking to do virtual sales before the building is approved, or the plans are approved for you? Would you be looking at doing virtual sales to get momentum going, or are you just strictly going to do it?
We would be we already have contacted, interviewed, and we'd be using a local realtor, and they use the multiple listing service, and, of course, all the online type of resources that listing service has. And, of course, the idea is to generate sales during construction.
Correct.
But the real time, most units, in my experience, really start getting sold is once you have a model, because so many people can't envision, some people do, but many of them want to see what it is they're moving into.
So would you be opening up one of the plans be opening up a sales center, if you want to call it that, in one of the buildings in the area, showing the quality of the product?
I think that'd be up to the developer and the owner, but I think the main focus was getting models open as soon as possible.
But that would only mean after the building is fully finished?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks. I just want to point out one thing, and first of all, just like my colleagues, I want to thank everyone for their comments tonight, in the past, the Plan Commission. This is what the process is all about, when folks often say, well, how are we being heard how is our voice being heard in village government? And you're sitting through an example of exactly how that works. Some of you have sat through it now 3 times. Some of you have sat through another context, but this is how the process works, and I think it's something that Downers Grove prides itself on, and I would go so far as to say head and shoulders above other communities. I'll probably get letters and emails from some of my colleagues in other communities now, but I'm adamant that is the case. Trust me on this. One thing I do want to just correct is it has never been the case that just because a petition for a special use meets setbacks, meets height, width, density, bulk, design criteria, that it therefore must be approved. I read the language earlier very carefully. It states that no special use may be recommended for approval or approved unless the respective review or decision-making body determines that the proposed special use is consistent with and in substantial compliance with all village council policy and plans. If there was a period after that, that would be one thing. There isn't. It goes on to say, and. So meeting all those criteria, that's a given. You don't even get past square one unless you meet all the plans and density and whatnot. And yes, sometimes there are requests for variations. Sometimes there are requests for a lot of things, and absolutely true. This petitioner is not asking for any variations. They're not asking for any deviations. They're not asking for any subsidizations, excuse me, it's late. But it has always been the case that in addition to meeting all the criteria, the applicant then does have to present evidence, and it is the applicant's burden of proof to support each of the following conclusions. And I won't read the 3 criteria again, but that's why we spend all the time talking about these things. That's why we entertain the comments from everyone. That's why evidence is presented as to whether or not there's a detrimental impact, or whether, if there is, it can be ameliorated by the council placing conditions on the proposed special use. If all we had to do was meet the criteria, we wouldn't be here tonight. So by definition, it goes beyond that. That's why we're having this conversation. And so it is not a stretch, nor is it inappropriate for residents to question, if not the admissibility, the weight of different evidence that is put forth either for or against a certain application for a special use. I just want to straighten that out. But obviously, it is clearly the petitioner's opinion that not only have the criteria been met, but that adequate evidence has been presented to meet the other criteria that then goes to the next step. And clearly, we've heard testimony and evidence from other people here tonight to the contrary. That's the weighing process that the council has to undertake and ultimately decide what is most persuasive in either granting or denying the special use, or granting it with conditions. Those are our 3 options: yes, no, or yes with conditions. But once again, thank you very much to everyone for their comments, both here and in the past. This is on the agenda for a vote next week.
Correct.
Thank you. I'm going to ask my colleagues whether you would like to take a break, or whether you think, given what's left on our agenda, we can muscle through.
Let's knock it out, Mayor.
Very short break. I'm hearing very short break.
No, just crank it up.
Pardon me?
Just go through it. We can knock this out in no time.
All right, well, some people have to take a short break. We'll take a very short break.
Okay.
I'm not going to be responsible for a biological situation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to reconvene after a short break. For those keeping score at home, we left off on item 9B as in boy on our first reading of our workshop agenda. Mr. Fieldman, would you like to introduce this item, please?
This is an ordinance that would amend Chapter 20 of our municipal code, referred to as our subdivision ordinance. The changes before you here are largely to reflect current practices since our last update, so we would consider those to be the housekeeping type of changes. There also is a substantive change in that the fair market value for land in lieu of school and park donations has been updated to reflect current land values in our village. So for the most part, these are housekeeping and clarifying items, and the one substantive issue is to change the market value of land for school and park district donations. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Now, how many of you in the audience have questions on this item? How many are going to speak?
Dr. Cookman.
I wouldn't want to disappoint you.
You got 3 more items to go, right?
Never have.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to comment on updating the value associated with the donations to your sister governments. Since about 1970, I've been working to get these values adjusted more rapidly than they have been in the past. I wanted to congratulate your staff on biting the bullet and beginning to do that. I think that it should be done even more regularly than you update your comprehensive plan. It has followed about the same timetable as update of the comprehensive plan in the past, and I hope both of them are going to be put on a more current basis. But congratulations.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from Village Council? 9C, please.
9C through the end of the first reading agenda, 9E, are changes and proposed amendments to Chapter 7, 14, and 19. Many of these changes are, again, clarifying in nature to reflect current practices and to address certain issues we've encountered, especially as we deal with improvements to streets and sidewalks. So many of the changes that the council has been requesting at budget items on how we treat open cuts and the bonds that are posted for making sure that our streets are kept in good repair during construction and that our sidewalk system is kept safe during construction are all addressed in these amendments. Of course, with that brief presentation, we are happy to answer any questions you may have on these items.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Questions or comments from the Village Council? They're all tuckered out.
That ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 10, the mayor's report. Mercifully, I have no report tonight. That brings us to item 11. Mr. Fieldman, manager's report.
Same report you had, Mayor. Thank you.
Very good. We'll go for the trifecta. Madam Attorney.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I have 4 items. The first is an ordinance amending provisions concerning streets and sidewalks, an ordinance amending Chapter 20, the subdivision and development ordinance, an ordinance establishing parking regulations during a snow emergency, and an ordinance amending provisions for demolition and construction of site management. All will be on next week's action agenda.
Thank you. Item 13, do any members of the Village Council have any items of new business they would like to present at this hour to the rest of their colleagues? Hearing none. From item 14, do I have a motion to